Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Ayo mefele sama. Mefele sama. Mama mefele sama. Mefele sama. Isa mefele sama. Mefele sama. Ay mama mefele sama. Mefele sama. Brada mefele sama. 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 Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre minefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Ayo mefele sama. Mefele sama. Mama mefele sama. Mefele sama. Isa mefele sama. Mefele sama. Mama mefele sama. Mefele sama. Mefele sama. Mefele sama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Ayo. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele obiama. Mina bakabusi nengre mefele sama. Ayo mefele sama. Mefele sama. Mama mefele sama. Mefele sama. Isa mefele sama. Mefele sama. Mama mefele sama. Mefele sama. Mama mefele sama. Mefele sama. Isa mefele sama. Mefele sama. Yesho na yehi mama. Yesho na yehi mama.
Microphone check 1, 2, 10, 9, Wadi, be thankful unto the mother, father, creative life force of the universe. Give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodia, African power and African liberation for all African people. Signal, if I can be heard, please. Signal, let me know say uno can hear, right? Loud and clear, right? And that's it. Because No one gonna further and the people them can't hear when me I say. So please make I know say I and I can be heard loud and clearly and all them thing there. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, all right. So we have it. I think say the people them can hear it. Mojuba, Eledumade, Mojuba, Orisha, Mojuba, Egungun. We give honor to the ultimate creative life force of the universe. We give honor to the forces of nature, and we give honor to our great ancestors, Muzimu Mukuru, our great ancestors. Big up everyone that's here nice and early. Please like the video as you come through, and share up the link far and wide. I'm gonna send a shout out to Melanated Goddess in the building. I feel like you're enjoying this little this little series, you know what I mean? Give thanks for your love still. I do truly appreciate love. Nyame Ubuntu, I love them name there. Nyame Ubuntu, Kawana Harris. Did I find out more about Kawana Harris, my sister? Is it South Carolina or North Carolina? I can't remember where you're there, but love to you, sis. More about the lyrics. So I've got a brethren on the thing. A brethren or a sister. Somebody on Twitter got back to me, gonna holler at their Surinamese brethren or sister who's on the case. But yeah, I think I said last week to the tune. By the way, Melanated Goddess is asking me about the tune that you just heard and the intro music, and it's from Suriname, yeah, the African people living in Suriname. So I was correct in the sense of the fact that the Bakabushi Negre is the maroon people, them, yeah, of Suriname. And so I'm waiting on the literal translation. But if we're speaking Jamaican patois, we'll say Bakabush. Yeah, so Bakabushi or Bakabusi is Bakabush, yeah, and Nengle is black people. So that's a literal translation, but that is what the so-called Maroons are referred to in Suriname, who were rebelling against enslavement and colonization. I believe there's something in there about Obia, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. But what I do know, which I suspected, but what has been confirmed is that it's a traditional Winti song, and Winti is an African spiritual system, yeah, as preserved and developed and evolved in Suriname. Yeah, and so you find it in a couple other places, but it's mostly in Suriname. All right, so it's a part of the Winti tradition, Winti, and Google that because there's information out there about Winti. It's a very beautiful and very systematized African spiritual retention. Yeah. So look out for that. So big up yourself, Melanated Goddess. Big up to Leo. Bigging up Chemo. Them dashing away like Steel Food Chakra, and I'm sure they dashing away with your approval, brother Chemo. But it's all good, you know what I'm saying? I'm sure you was cheering them on when them dash me away. But you know, everything bless. Big up to Conan Lee, Jadorion. Big up yourself. All right. Kawana said she moved going to DC. She going to the capital. You know what I'm saying? All right. Oh, that reminds me. I do have to correct something that I said. Yeah, I misspoke in the previous, in part 2. I was talking about the extent to which contradictions existed among Africans in the diaspora when I was challenging Brother Raborn statement about the contradictions that existed on the continent, and the idea that because those contradictions existed, Pan-Africanism must have been null and void on the continent of Africa. And I was running down various different contradictions, and I said that America moved against the revolution in Haiti, and they sent troops, and some of those troops are enslaved Africans. I don't know that for a fact, yeah, and that was a misspeak. I do know, I'm made to understand that was the case in relation to the French, the Spanish, and the British, yeah. But I don't know that's exactly the case for the United States of America. All right, so because I was watching it back and I was like, why did I say the USA? All right, so that's a quick correction there. Although I'm not saying that's not the case, I don't know that to be the case. Yeah, so that would need to be researched. All right, so quick, you know what I mean, what's the word, house cleaning this. But welcome, kings and queens. Yeah, for those who are not aware, as you can see, the title of the show is Pan-African Outcasts of the Conscious Community Part 3. All right, and this will be the final part, and I'm going through a conversation that I had when I was on brother Garfield's channel some weeks ago, and an interesting conversation was had. And as has been alluded to by the comments, I was removed, from the platform for the second time in a row, I might add. Although the first time I got about 2 minutes before I was removed, and this time, and I was there for a good couple hours. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna type the name of the tune in the chat for you, melanated. By the way, I don't know if you realize, if you heard me say before, but the group is called Isasi, and they are the original singers of the song Faluma, that Square One became famous for. All right, but basically Square One went to Suriname, and apparently they're known for singing local tune, and so they sang that one and it blew up the place. And but this is the group that originally sang that song. All right, so I'm putting that in the chat. And the whole album that song is on is a beautiful album, so do check out the whole album. Blessings to Stoic One, another brother or sister that's been staying with me for this whole series. So anyway, so the conversation was about Pan-Africanism, and I thought that the way the conversation went and the points that were raised in the conversation made for some good exploration on matters such as these, on the issues that were discussed. And I've titled the show as I've titled it because, may I realize the extent to which Pan-African and African-centered consciousness, ideals, activism, and organization is becoming marginalized within the context of what is referred to as the conscious community. That the goals that are associated with Pan-Africanism, specifically or particularly in its Black nationalist and revolutionary formations, are being rejected and negated, misrepresented within the context of the conscious community. And those who affirm said ideals are being attacked and being marginalized. Those who affirm the African-centered or Afrocentric scholarship tradition and paradigm in relation to the liberation of African people are steadily being moved against by many under different guises, and various different motivations, all of which seem to result in a propping up a support for, wittingly or unwittingly, the dominant Western European hegemony as it stands. And so we're not engaging this conversation on this platform for the sake of antagonism, bad chatting people, beef, hype, excitement. I know that we're there on. I know that we're there on. All right, Ron Yasso. We're going to engage the arguments, and at times we will refer to the spirit of the argument, as in where the spirit of the argument becomes necessary to explore. Okay, so that is the foundation for the conversation. I've invited a few brothers and sisters to come through if they want to, as I've always done. We'll see if I choose to open up the line broadly today. I'm not sure. But giving thanks to brothers Chief Fode and Brother Sekou, who was also on the same conversation. You hear his voice, who have joined me for previous, rundowns in this regard. But we're going to explore it further today. All right. So give thanks. Forgive me if I don't delve into the chat too much, because there is a lot to get through. So I will look at the chat at some point. But I'm gonna come back to the chat later and definitely at the end, and we'll see if brothers and sisters want to come live with me then. Okay, so I'm gonna start more or less where I ended off last week, and there's a lot that I explore after this clip at the end of part 2. So if you want to hear some of my rundown of some of what Rob was going to say at this point where I begin here, then you're going to have to go to the end of last week's video. But I'm going to explore a few other things as well. Now, this is probably going to be the most important of this particular series, because at the end of this conversation, I am asked some very specific questions in relation to the relationship between the conditions of Africans in the United States of America and the conditions of Africans on the continent. The idea was being put forward to me that the politics of Africa, the politics of the African continent, has nothing to do with the politics of Africans in the United States of America. And I was asked some direct questions that I was told I didn't answer. I'm going to re-answer that question and provide some context for it, for my answers. And I'm also going to be addressing some of the ways in which the argumentation put forward in this discussion affects the reparations movement of today. All right. So we're going to come practical, we're going to come modern, we're going to come up to date, yeah, with the arguments and see how they affect activism and so on and so forth in this day and age. I hope ones and ones overstand when me I say, and we're gonna get into this right about now. So do stay tuned. Share the link far and wide, family. Make them know, say the revolutionary Pan-Africanists, the universal African nationalists, the Garveyite, yes, the ambassador of arts and culture for the UNIA ACL RC 2020, which is the organization of the most eminent prophet Marcus Messiah Garvey, is online right about now, addressing issues concerning Pan-Africanism and African liberation right now. Once again, hit up the link. Hit up the like button and share the link far and wide. All right, let's get into this thing right, Yasso.
Get you. All right. This right here is a brief account of the settlement and the present situation of the colony of Sierra Leone in Africa. This is Paul Cuffey. Remember what I told you? He decided to develop trade between blacks in England, Sierra Leone, and the United States. He also began to consider the possibility of relocating skilled African Americans to the society and founded the Friendly Society. But when he got there, we're going to blow this up. This is what he said. The Mandingo tribes profess Mohammedanism. He said he became acquainted with them. But something else happens. They have declined the practice of selling their own tribe, but notwithstanding this, they continue to sell those of other tribes and thought it hard that the trafficking slaves should be abolished, as they were made poor in consequence thereof. What is he talking about? He's talking about the end of the slave trade, that the white man, the British man said, yo, this is a wrap. So while he's over there, he's trying to stop them from selling our people. This is the thing we're talking about. This is Pan-Africanism. This is what it came to. You can't show that coming from Africa to the Americas. You don't see it. This is what this black man tried to do. And what did they do? They wanted to run him out of there. And that's the original reason why Sierra Leone, one of the reasons why Sierra Leone originally, that free colony fell, because these people were interfering with the slave trade. So when we're talking about Pan-Africanism, it has a definition. We're not going
to... All right. So in part 2, yeah, I run down the contradiction of that argument. We're not denying that there were Africans on the continent who were collaborating with the enslavement process. But Africans collaborated with the enslavement process throughout the enslavement process, at every point of the enslavement process. You have people that collaborated and people that resisted. That is the nature of oppression. Yeah, that's what happens, okay? What we did last week was to run down and give examples of resistance on the African continent. The fact that maroon communities existed on the African continent as well as they existed in the Afrikan diaspora. The Africans collaborated in resisting militarily the enslavement process. They attacked ships. They attacked African collaborators. Yes, they attacked European enslavers, yeah, on the African continent, and collaborated with each other, various different groups, to do so. There are people groups that are considered homogenous tribes today that were founded for example, in places like Benin, yeah, that were founded based upon the amalgamation of different so-called ethnicities who were fleeing from enslavement raids. Yeah. So we ran that down last week. If you want a bit more information on that, go check that out. All right. The point being that when we look at dynamics such as these, the narrative of the single story, as it's popularly referred to, is very destructive, because the idea is that because of the contradiction that Brother Raborn has alluded to, that Pan-Africanism is totally non-existent and impossible on the African continent. The Africans were not able, on the continent to be able to develop any kind of Pan-African ideals and idealism, which is false. All right. So I'm gonna just add one more example, to this thing. Just one more example, all right. And this example speaks to the complexity of these dynamics, the complexity of these dynamics. It's not a simple situation, but it's a dynamic that you're not really going to hear too many people refer to, because it does complicate the Western narrative and these things. And we're going to go into the motivation behind all of these vibes in a second. So this is taken from a paper entitled "The Kingdom of the Kingdom of Congo and the 30 Years War." Right? It's by a guy called John Thornton. Okay, and it refers to the relationship between the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the people of Ndongo, what later becomes Angola and Congo. Okay, in the 1600s. All right. So bear this in mind, and I'm sure, I guarantee you, most people have never heard of this. And if this is the first time that you're hearing of this story, just let me know in the chat. Let me know if you've ever heard of this story before. Okay. All right. So it says in November 1622, while negotiations were still in progress, the Portuguese Imbangala, and the Imbangala is a group of elusive Africans, because nobody actually knows who they were or where they come from, but they're a militarized group of people who the Portuguese in particular used against other Africans. Nobody even necessarily refers to them in terms of them having a state or a nation, but they were used as mercenaries. And the depictions of them, whether they're completely true or not, are particularly savage. But they were used by the Portuguese as mercenaries against other Africans. So the Portuguese Mbangala army arrived in Mbumbi, a trading town in southern Mbamba. Taken by surprise, the Duke of Mbamba had hastily put together a force to meet the threat, but was defeated. The Mbangala cannibals ate a number of Congo nobles in the aftermath. The Portuguese merchants who had business interests in Congo protested loudly against the atrocity. And so basically, anyway, I won't explain right now. While Correia de Sousa, who was the governor, as far as the Portuguese were concerned at the time, may have hoped that a rival king would support Portuguese interest against Pedro II, whose proper name is, I believe, Nkanga Mvika. But this was the king of Congo at the time. But at this point, the royal family in the Congo had become Christianized, and so many of them had Christian names. And were properly referred to by the Christian names by the Portuguese, even though that may not have been the case within the Kingdom of Congo to the same degree. Okay, or that there would be a civil war. So there was dissension in the Congo Kingdom, one because of the nature of enslavement processes, and two because of the fact that the royal family had been Christianized as well. All right, and not everybody was happy with that. The Congo elite rallied behind their king, and the large Congo army moved south, met the invaders near the town of Mbandakasi, and roundly defeated them. Yeah, so these Africans in Congo defeated an enslavement raiding force. Okay, as the invading Portuguese army streamed back to Angola, anti-Portuguese riots broke out all over Congo. Some merchants were killed, and the Dutch themselves witnessed the humiliation of Portuguese in Soyo, stripped of their clothes, their ships disabled, and their property threatened. Pedro, this is the Congo king now, yeah, and Kanga Vika, launched a diplomatic offensive in the wake of the victory at Mbandakasi. He sent letters to the King of Spain and the Pope denouncing the action of the governor. Jesuit priests resident in Congo supported Congo and a large group of Portuguese merchants, many of whom lived in Mbumbi or had dealings through it, wrote their own joint letter of denunciation. Pedro, the Congo king, in fact protected those Portuguese interests even against angry subjects who called him the king of the Portuguese for doing so. Yeah, so we can see there's a complex set of relationships going on here, but the long and short of it is that there's a battle between the Congo, yeah, and the Portuguese. The Congo people then win, all right, and basically after that, the king of the Congo is launching a diplomatic offensive now against the Portuguese enslavers. Yeah, Pedro's wows protecting some of the interests of some of the merchants who are prepared to support him. Okay, that's politics. All right. Pedro's European diplomacy brought quick results. Correia de Souza was deposed and arrested. That was the representative of Portugal in the area, eventually dying in prison. The Bishop of Congo, Simao de, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that Portuguese name, took over as interim governor and immediately returned 53 Congo nobles who had been imprisoned in the war. And the Portuguese council in Lisbon agreed to return over 1,000 other enslaved prisoners from Brazil, where they had been sent to work on sugar estates. In other words, because of the activities of this particular Congo king, having won a battle against the Portuguese, he used his position of power at that time to secure the return of somewhere in the region of 1,200 I've seen, yeah, is the estimate that I've most commonly seen, about 1,200 enslaved Africans from Brazil back to the Congo. Okay, now that's a story, a very complex story, a very, very complex story, politically speaking, yeah, but that is a story and a fact of history. Can anybody tell me if they know this story? Yeah, just let me know if you know this particular story. All right, so we're gonna pause that there. The point I'm making here is that there's context and contextualization, yeah, that people that have any semblance of an anti-African agenda or an anti-continental African agenda tend not to want to engage when they're running down the history. Yeah, contradictions existed among African people everywhere. The development of a Pan-African ideology and movement was intended to lessen those contradictions everywhere. It doesn't mean that all Africans in each place was about that life. And the fact that all Africans in each place was not about that life doesn't negate the existence of those who were. That is the point that is being made. I hope that is clear. We're going to move forward. And by the way, usually I've just been playing the video, letting the video play. I'm actually playing the last hour of my presence on the panel today, and I'm probably going to skip through a bit. I haven't been skipping, so I allow people to get a proper understanding and feel for what the conversation was and who said what and so on and so forth. But today, you know, because I think if you've watched part 1 and 2, you would get, you know, a good idea of that anyway. So we don't need to go over that. But to get through it quicker, I'm going to skip some bits that are you know, yeah, that I can basically, you know, skip and still have a fruitful conversation. We're going to get back into the discussion right about now, so do bear with I. And yeah, you know what I mean, give thanks and share the link, kings and kings, share the links, and like out the video as in the come through. Is it all right?
Gonna play well. The tribes in Ghana came together. They came together with war. Dahomey came together with war, warring on other tribes to create empire. This Pan-Africanism now we created here is the unification of all people without going to war with each other. You need to.
So just to explain, for those who may not be aware, Brother Rawborn is attacking a point that Brother Sekou made, where he was identifying Pan-African sensibilities within pre-colonial African empires. Yeah. And so Rawborn is attempting to create a dichotomy between the development of Pan-Africanism, or the Pan-Africanist development in the Americas, or not even in the Americas, in the United States of America, and juxtapose it with what Africans were doing on the continent, with the idea that the only true Pan-Africanism was in the United States of America, that it began in the United States of America, and Africans on the continent only ever developed any Pan-African sensibility when Africans from the United States of America went there and brought it them. He's also creating a dichotomy as he goes forward with the effectiveness of Pan-Africanism in the diaspora, in the United States of America, and Pan-Africanism on the African continent. All right, just to explain, because you may not get that if you just come into the conversation. Bless.
To get your information correct. And lastly, for Ankh, the Free African Society, the New York African Society, and all of those other societies was successful in their form of Pan-Africanism because they decided to deal with what we are dealing here and did not want to go back to Africa, which all of them.
All right. So what he's just said is that those who were dealing with Pan-Africanism in the Americas were effective because they wanted to deal with what they were dealing with in America and did not want to go back to Africa. Yeah. And so he's created a dichotomy between the effectiveness or between Africans who want to remain in America and Africans who want to go back to Africa as a definitive factor in terms of whether their programs worked or not. The contradiction of what he's just said is what he has on the screen when he said it. So he's got Prince Hall petition on the screen, yeah, and I'll read it for you, as I read a piece of it last week, but I'm going to read it directly from the screen right about now. Yeah, it says, "We or our ancestors." This is the Prince Hall petitioning, leading a petition on behalf of a number of quote unquote African blacks. That's what the petition says. Yeah. In 1787, as we see, we or our ancestors have been taken from our dear connections and brought from Africa and put into a state of. Sorry, do you know what? I've got this somewhere else here. So I'm going to read from there, but you can see on the screen. You'll be able to see on the screen and know that it's because some of it's cut off, but you'll be able to see on the screen and know that what I'm saying is actually a fact, right? So remember, he's saying that they chose to do what they were dealing with in America, and that's why they were successful. But the petition he's got on the screen says, "We or our ancestors have been taken from our dear connections and brought from Africa." Yeah. Now, bear in mind, we or our ancestors. Some of the people that signed this petition and wrote it were born on the continent of Africa. Yes. This is 1887. This is just over a decade after the success of the American Revolution, 1776. Yeah. The nation and the identity of American, yeah, just about exists. And does not exist in relation to the African people in that part of the world. Okay, so these are Africans from the continent. Yeah, to a significant degree, who are writing and signing this petition. Bear that in mind. Okay, and what they say is, we or our ancestors have been taken from our dear connections and brought from Africa and put into a state of slavery in this country, from which unhappy situation we have been lately in some measure delivered by the new constitution, which has been adopted by this state. It's 1776, right? or by a free act of our former masters, but we yet find ourselves in many respects in very disagreeable and disadvantageous circumstances, most of which must attend us so long as we and our children live in America. This is what the petition says. Okay, all right. And so on and on. So the rest of that is not on the screen. So I'm gonna share. So you can see what's on the screen to see that when me I say it's truth me attack. Yeah. So let me show you what it actually says all on there. So you know what's on the line me I tell. All right. It's documented in a presentation that I've put together and delivered on this platform some years ago called What's Wrong with Being African. Yeah. So you can check that out on your own time if you don't want to. Okay. All right. So this is what the petition says. I'm going to go to the second paragraph now. Oh, Lord. As good looking as I am, I know it's not me you want to see right here now. So let me start presenting there, sir. And I'll tell you what I got to do from current slide. There we go. All right. This and other considerations, which we need not here particularly mention, induce us earnestly to desire to return to Africa, our native country, which warm climate is much more natural and agreeable to us, and for which the God of nature has formed us, and where we shall live among our equals and be more comfortable and happy than we can be in our present situation, and at the same time may have the prospect of usefulness to our brethren there. Yeah, I could go on because there's more in the petition, except to say that this last section here is a call for reparations. Yeah, that so basically they're saying that due to the fact of enslavement and the disenfranchisement of African people, the American state must furnish them with the wherewithal to make the trip. Yeah, and so on and so forth. All right. So the point that's being made is that there are Africans. Pan-Africanism is not just about returning to the African continent, although repatriation is an essential component, an indispensable and indelible component of Pan-African development. That is not the be-all and end-all of it. And as I said in part one, there is no Pan-African movement, no Pan-African leader, no Pan-African ideology, no Pan-African scholarship tradition, no Pan-African organization that advocates for the negation of addressing the conditions of African people where they are for the sake of returning to Africa or addressing issues on the African continent. That never happens. Yeah. I have never come across it, and I've been a Pan-Africanist all my life. Yeah. And I live in London, UK, the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Okay. Yes, I'm live. This is where I've lived all of my life. And within the Pan-African community, we have always been addressing issues of the African community in the UK, as well as African communities on the continent of Africa, as well as African communities in the United States of America, as well as African communities in the Caribbean. Yeah, but the majority of our work, by virtue of where we are domiciled, will be with our community where we're there. For example, when we start the Saturday school, the Al-Kebel Academy of Excellence, we're teaching children we're born and raised in the UK. We're not teaching children that's born and raised in Ghana, Nigeria, and Congo, and South Africa, and Kenya. All right? I say it, go. So anyway, yeah, so he's actually, Brother Rob Wall is answering one of Brother Ank's questions that he asked earlier about what were the successes of Pan-Africanism, because he can't see any. And so Brother Rob Wall suggested that the only successes in Pan-Africanism are to be found among Black people or Black Americans, Black people in the United States of America. All right, bearing in mind that the concept of a Black American barely exists, if it exists at all, in 1787. Okay, all right, let's stop that, and we're going to go forward with the conversation. Yeah, and it's going to get very interesting soon. Bear in mind, like I said, I hope ones and ones can stay to the end of the rundown today, because we're gonna get into some present day issues, yeah. And I want to deal with some of the present day issues and that beautiful question that Brother Rabon asked me at the end, which he actually wouldn't allow me to answer, or wouldn't receive the answer, or didn't understand the answer, any one of the above. But we're gonna get into the answer in more detail today, yeah, because nobody can throw Shakara off a Shakara platform, as I said, God, you know what I'm saying? Well, except for the fact that, you know, really and truly, we don't own YouTube and Facebook, but as I said, God, that's another contradiction to resolve for another day, kings and queens. We got the chat. As I announced earlier, yeah, I'm going to be running through this conversation, so I won't be focusing on the chat so much. But big up yourself anyway. Continue to have your own conversations, and I'll get to you shortly. All right, blessings.
The majority of us denied to go back there because of the reports that was coming back from Liberia, where you have black people in Liberia writing their slave master, telling me, "Master, I'll work for you, bring me home." And then if you talk about Marcus Garvey, who pulled one of the greatest scams ever, when he was supposed to send our brother over there, the father of what? Of atheism here in America. You should know his name. I can tell it to you. They went over there and they wrote back and said, Liberia is horrible. If the streets are dirty, there's no agriculture, but it was intercepted. And when that letter was intercepted, the Europeans used that to try to derail his movement. And Garvey didn't want to tell the black people in America that this is what the fuck was going on over there. He didn't want to tell us the truth. He wanted to stick to his crazy, I'm the king of Africa, and never been to Africa. So what Ankh is saying is correct in the essence as far as that form of Pan-Africanism. When you're looking at that, it is always us who are the ones who initiate this thing, who go back and forth. We the ones who come from America, going over there, trying to negotiate with Africans to stop selling niggas. Don't come on here talking about Black American history and you don't know it.
All right, so a couple things there. Yeah, it's very. I'm not even going to go in on the Marcus Garvey thing because I want to see that there was a call, yeah, for sources throughout this whole conversation. Yeah, and you notice that it depends on who's speaking. Who is speaking depends on when and how sources are called for, because he made a number of statements about the prophet Marcus Mosiah Garvey, yeah, and to be quite frank, spoke about Marcus Garvey outside of the context of the organization, the government of the UNIA ACL, yes, which is a flaw in general, but made a number of statements and didn't source one of them. Yeah, didn't provide any evidence for any of them. Right, so that's point number one. Point number two is I've noticed the trend. Yeah, this argument that he's put forward has become very typical in ADOS and FBA circles. Yeah, this is a fundamental ADOS FBA argument. Okay, that Marcus Garvey was a scammer, and that the scam that he was on was about taking people back to Africa, yeah, which is an oversimplification of the UNIA ACL program. Having said that, it's very interesting to me that whenever a group of people or an individual wants to promote an anti-African or anti-continental African's perspective or agenda, they seem to feel the need. Yes, they seem to feel the need to attack the character, the program, and the integrity of the most honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Yeah? Please find me where Marcus Garvey ever said, I'm the king of Africa. Please find me where Marcus Garvey declared himself the king of Africa. What I'm alluding to is the fact that Marcus Mosiah Garvey was elected by convention in 1920 as the provisional president of the United States of Africa. For those who are familiar with revolutionary histories, provisional governments are not uncommon in circumstances where leaders of resistance and revolutionary movements are exiled from the land of their nationhood. Yeah, other peoples have elected governments in exile. Fidel Castro was planning his revolution. I forget where. I think it was Colombia that he was in. Somebody correct me if I'm incorrect. Yeah, but a lot of the governmental organization of Fidel Castro was planned outside of Cuba, and they moved the revolution into Cuba. The Irish did the same thing. They elected a government in exile. Yeah, and at the that convention, we're talking about an attendance of over 25,000 people in the convention itself. A parade that included over 100,000 people, and representation physically and through correspondence with Africans all over the world, continent and diaspora, challenging the legitimacy of the colonization of the French, the British, the Germans, the Portuguese, etc., 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 with their assistance and support of the United States of America. So why is it that Marcus Mosiah Garvey and the UNIA ACR and the convention is illegitimate, but the governors imposed by Britain, the governors imposed by France and Portugal, etc., etc., are legitimate? Because that's what was governing at the time. One second. I think I'm getting some. Big up Camjiverse in the building. Yeah, big up Camjiverse in the building. In fact, I'm highlighting because I want you to go check out his channel. Yeah, and yes, this is what I was just saying. Yeah, Garvey was elected by 25,000 delegates, and these dudes are claiming he was the king. It's madness. All right, but big up yourself and check out Camjiverse's channel, Kings and Queens. Conan Lee says, I think Castro and Che were in Mexico. Stand corrected. Yeah. Stand corrected where that is concerned. All right. You know. So yeah. So Ayatollah Khomeini, yep. Lugani says that Ayatollah Khomeini was elected from outside Iran. I saw it go. All right. So all that's taking place is that the Africans in this convention are developing an infrastructure through which to challenge colonialism as it exists. Not just on the African continent, because remember, the United States and the African nationhood was not confined to the African continent. There were Africans all over the world. Yeah. So Marcus Garvey didn't have to go to Africa, although that was the plan. And another day we'll go. Actually, I've already done it. There's a video on my channel, the Pan-African question: why didn't Marcus Mosiah Garvey go to Africa? Yeah. Check that out if you want the full story of why Marcus Garvey never got the African continent. All right. And it is answered there. To cut a long story short, the colonial administrations literally signed papers and put forward laws that were designed to ban Marcus Garvey and the members of the UNIA from reaching the African continent. I hate that. Yeah. All right, let's go forward.
I'm done, man.
All right, hold on one second, guys. Hold on. Everybody mute. Hold on, my brother.
We're Africans to stop selling niggas. Don't come on here talking about Black American history and you don't know it.
So that last statement, there's a red herring. First of all, the conversation was not about Black American history. The conversation was about Pan-Africanism. Yeah, which is not exclusive to Black American history. And secondly, he just spent a good portion of his last statement talking about the history of Africans on the continent and telling Brother Sekou, who is an African from the continent, about the history of Africans on the continent. But you don't want, anybody to talk about quote unquote Black American history. Yeah, and apparently we don't know it. All right, so yeah. Anyway, let's go forward.
I'm done, man.
All right, hold on one second, guys. Hold on. Everybody mute. Hold hold on, my brother. Hold on, before you go. All right, so listen, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe to the channel. Shout out to Brother Garfi Podcast. We got 13,000 subscribers now. And if you haven't subscribed, I think Miss Tiffany's putting Pseudo Killers in the chat. Subscribe to the Pseudo Killers. And of course, subscribe to this channel. All right, shout out to everybody. Let's keep it peaceful in the chat, by the way, man. And this is another way. Listen, we might come from different backgrounds, but we can disagree and be disagreeable. All right. So go ahead, my brother.
Was he timing that, Brother Garfield?
Huh?
Did you time that last comment?
Did you say that when Sekou's talking, Jabari? Right? No, so don't say that about me. Now let's keep the conversation going and deal with the information.
I didn't.
This is directed at you and the other Jabari.
I didn't need to say. Okay, so admittedly, I'm being a bit mischievous here, yeah. To put context on this, Brother Sekou Kele was speaking prior, and Garfield had this thing where he gave everybody 2 minutes. Brother Sekou, he said, spoke for about 5 minutes. Yeah, he said he was timing him. This is what Brother Garfield said. He interrupted the brother and said, "You've been speaking for 5 minutes. I've been timing it." All right. Brother Sekou wanted to complete a statement, and Brother Garfield, as well as Brother Ankh and Brother Raborn, said, nah. Yeah. And so I asked when Brother Raborn finished if Brother Garfield was timing Raborn. Now, at the time, what I didn't do was time Raborn. Yeah. Now, Raborn in his last statement spoke for about 6-7 minutes. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? The statement started at 1 hour, 39 minutes and some seconds. Yeah. And was concluded at around 1 hour 46 minutes and some seconds. Yeah. All right. So I was just being mischievous and asking whether he was timed as well as Brother Sekou. Yeah. And you can see that that Raborn doesn't seem to recognize the contradiction in his protests against my asking that question in this moment in time. But I just said, I've kind of got to realize the spirit of the brother tends to be very argumentative. And so that's just that. If you're going to do it, then you just have to do with that, or you just choose not to engage. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, say it was made clear that Brother Sekou was being timed. I'm asking if
you should have said it then. Deal with the information. Stop playing games. Let's go.
It was said already. I didn't know who needs to say.
Stop sharing on, Rob. All
right, so a number of points have been made. Yeah. Let's start with the indigenous peoples of the Americas have various different organizations that are designed to unite them to challenge the colonialism that they continue to face. One of them, one such formation is relation to the name Abiyala, yeah, which is a title, a name for the North and South America that was developed by the indigenous peoples and declared by them to be their unifying name for those lands. Yeah. But what's clear to me from the conversation is, so just so you know, say I know foolishness me attack. First and foremost, that last statement is in relation to a previous comment that Brother Ankh made about the fact that the native, he's trying to negate the Pan-African ideal based upon the idea that the indigenous peoples of the Americas, they're literally the same people genetically and so on and so forth, but they don't know that though culturally, and they had their whatevers and they could never really unite. So what makes us think that we can unite? Yeah. But Brother Ankh is just simply not aware of indigenous movements among the indigenous peoples of the Americas that are designed to do just that. Yeah. And so just so you know, seminar talk foolishness. In fact, let me just share the entire screen for this one. Share entire screen. Yeah, so I can breeze through some of these. Okay, so this is the Wikipedia page, yeah, for the Abiyala terminology, all right, which is in the Kuna language, which means land in its full maturity or land of vital blood, in the name used by the Native American Guna people who inhabited the geographic region called Darien Gap between what is now Northwest Colombia and Southeast Panama, to refer to the American continent. Since pre-Columbian times, the term is used by millions of indigenous peoples on the American continent. Origin: the Bolivian Aymara leader Takir Mamani argues for the use of the term Abiyala in the official declarations of indigenous peoples governing bodies, saying that, quote, placing foreign names on our villages, our cities, and our continents is equivalent to subjecting our identity to the will of our invaders and their heirs, the United States of America. Thus, use of the term Abiyala rather than such terms as New World or America may have ideological implications indicating support for indigenous rights. Yeah. So I'm not gonna go into anything too much further. You can check that out. Yeah. Abiyala. All right. And then just as another example, you have the American Indian movement. It's a Native American grassroots movement founded in July 1968, initially centered in urban areas to address systematic issues of poverty, discrimination, police brutality against Native Americans. Yeah. AIM soon widened its focus from urban issues to include many indigenous tribal issues that Native American groups have faced due to settler colonialism of in the Americas. They have included treaty rights, high rates of unemployment, Native American education, cultural continuity, and the preservation of indigenous cultures. Yeah. So this is another group. Yeah. What that one could refer to as pan-indigenous American if one wanted to, although that's not a terminology that I know them to use. But I'm just saying, yeah, it's designed to unify the indigenous peoples of the Americas in response to the colonization and genocide that they have faced against, at the hands of all of the Europeans who invaded the Americas and founded the United States of America and other white-dominated nation states in the Americas. So I was making that point. Yeah, it's a side point, but the point is that here is that when you are engaged in actual Pan-African organizing, there are things that you encounter. Yeah. So to a significant degree, this whole conversation is based upon a changing of the guard, yeah, that in my estimation took place between the 1980s and the 1990s, which is where Black African leadership began to be replaced by Black African scholarship. Whereas prior to, there was a symbiotic relationship, yeah, between a Carter G. Woodson and a Marcus Mosiah Garvey, a John Henrik Clark, yeah, and Omowale Malcolm X. Baba Sheikh Anta Diop was a scholar and an activist. All right, there's a symbiotic relationship there. At some point, the question becomes less what are we doing and what are we organizing to do, and it becomes what do we know and how can we get to know it. Yeah. And so many people that are engaged in the so-called conscious community, especially the online conscious community, are not members of organizations that are working on behalf of African people. Yeah, there's a significant amount of people that are readers and researchers on things of African history and scholarship. Yeah, but the only use for that is debating people online and mashing up a boy. Yeah, if him test your information, and you have the big scholarship gun. Yeah, if you draw upon him, if him ever test you and your information and all these things. Then there's another set of people who these people seem to want to marginalize at this point, who are actual members of Black nationalist, Pan-Africanist, and Afrocentric or African-centered organizations who are doing work in communities and on behalf of African peoples and are developing frameworks through which to forward that work. And it seems that the former, the people that want to read book and argue people online, are having issues. Yeah, they're very uncomfortable with the presence of the organizers. Yeah, among them. That's what I'm right about now, kings and queens, and that is what I'm profiling. 1 second, let me just big up the brother Omowale Africa, yeah, who is in the building. Yeah, another brother that you need to go check out his channel. You know what I'm saying? Subscribe. If you're not subscribed right about now, subscribe to the thing. Yeah, it's very necessary. All right, kings and queens, beg yourself, brother Omawale, a man who is a member of organization, as I'm making that point. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Man, you know, let's come on YouTube and start talk something. No, the man there is involved in organization that are actively doing work. Yes, on behalf of African people. I wanted to know that. All right. Okay. Is that this is a question of goals and what people's ultimate goals are. And the difference can be found in the essence of when one is actually actively engaged in Pan-African development and organizing, and when one is not, yeah, and when one's goals or ultimate objectives are different from that of independent, autonomous nation building, and when one is more of an assimilationist. And you know, if that's one's goals, then you're entitled to that. At the same time, I don't think an assimilationist goal is a viable perspective from which to analyze the goal of autonomy, African sovereignty, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Right, so this would have been in a conversation last week. You wouldn't have heard it, but at that point, I'm responding to a point that brother Ankh made. And last week I was saying that, you know, it's been a long time since we've heard brother Ankh say Black African power, and this conversation is evidence as to why. Yes, we're not here, brother Ankh Akek, yeah, say Black African power for a little while, no, yeah, and so in this conversation, we're seeing why, yeah, him not repeat them words there for a little while still. But he was making the point that him can't see no success at all with Pan-Africanism achieve, but he can see the success of a Martin Luther King. Now, I never impugn the character or the efforts of Baba Martin Luther King. Baba Martin Luther King is one of the greatest leaders, yeah, among African people ever in the history of African people. Baba Martin Luther King is one of the bravest men that I've ever come to know in life. And if we had more of him in this day and age, we would be better off as a people. Yeah, and I say that as a hardcore, unadulterated, lifelong Black nationalist Pan-Africanist. However, have some ideological differences with our Baba Martin Luther King. Yeah, but what it is that the achievements of Martin Luther King, as is popularly espoused, yes, is concerning the extent to which we have, and I'm saying we, yes, I'm saying we, assimilated, yes, into Western society in general, or more specifically, the extent to which Africans in America have assimilated into American society, have laws on the books and voting rights and more Black state governors or city mayors or chiefs of police and so on. You know, the extent to which, you know, we can go into restaurants in America and so on and so forth. Right. This is the popular narrative that is associated with Baba Martin Luther King. So the point I'm making here is that this is not they kept saying that the Pan-African ideal is not realistic. And I'm saying, no, this is not about realism. This is about conviction. You are not convicted by it. Yeah. And so you attempt to negate its reality because you do not have the wherewithal to commit yourself to that vision. Yeah. Has nothing to do with reality. Okay. And so when we see what they see as their ideal of success, it gives us an indication of what their goals are. And the goals that are being espoused here, covertly or overtly, all right, are that of integration and assimilation, radical or otherwise. Okay. All right. The idea that Pan-Africanism in the diaspora, or well, I don't know if Brother Rabon was talking about the diaspora, just the United States of America, but the idea that wasn't formed in the context of warfare is a slight contradiction based upon the fact that what was read out made reference to racial discrimination, colonialism, economic, political, social, and cultural oppression, all of which are acts of war. Yeah. And when we talk about the fact that Africans use Pan-Africanism to, quote, resist, exploitation and oppression, they are also resisting warfare, okay, in that regard. And so to a significant degree, those Pan-African formations were developed in the context of war to withstand a war that was imposed upon African people, and a similar process took place on the African continent. All right, so I want to say, in all fairness to Brother Raborn, when I listened back to what he was saying, I understood it slightly differently than I understood it in that moment. The point that Brother Raborn was making is that when Brother Sekou is deriving principles of Pan-Africanism from Kemet and the Nile Valley, and Tar Seti and the Nile Valley, and Ouagadougou, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, the Bakonga Empire, Mona Matapa, in the sense of the fact that all of these larger nationhood formations, a common feature of them is the amalgamation of various different groups into a unified nationhood concept. Brother Raborn is incensed by Brother Sekou drawing those principles and saying that all of those empires were built in the context of war. And whilst it is true, whilst it is true that some warfare took place in certain instances, that is not the whole story. Okay. At the same time, like I said, I understood him to be saying that something different, which is what I was responding to there. But as I've already alluded to, and you can find more details of this in the previous edition of the video of this series, Africans on the continent responded in some of the similar ways that we did in the diaspora. There are maroon villages on the African continent. People that escaped enslavement camps and so on and so formed free communities, in certain places, and people rebelled against enslavers from various different people groups, including those who were European and those who came from among African peoples, right? That happened. All of these things happened. So I'm just being fair to Brother Raborn and saying I understood this point differently, all right, than how I understood it when I listened back to it again. Okay. But the point I'm making here though still stands. Either way, like the context for us developing the Pan-Africanism that he's referring to in the diaspora was a warfare context. And that should not be underestimated. Martin Delaney went to Africa and also signed a treaty with the Egba chiefs, in what was called, what later became known as Yorubaland. And that treaty was signed, that is recorded, but he didn't go there by himself. He went there with a brother by the name of Robert Campbell, who was from the Caribbean, and who actually stayed in Nigeria when Martin Delaney actually returned to the United States of America. So we have to look at it as, brother. Just for context, for those who may not be aware, because this was a previous thing that doesn't feature in what I've played so far, Brother Raborn made this point about Martin Delaney having gone to Nigeria and been beaten up and run out of the country. I don't know whether Martin Delaney was beaten up or not. What I do know is that he was not run out of the country. And first of all, there was no Nigeria when Martin Delaney went to among the Egba chiefs. Nigeria is a creation of the British that wasn't formalized until the year 1914. Baba Martin Delaney went to this area of the world in 1859-1960. Okay, and so but he signed a treaty, with some of the chiefs for land on behalf of the African race in America. Okay, and in the official report of the Niger Exploration Party, which is what the formation that him and Baba Robert Campbell were involved in when they went there, he speaks of the welcome that was accorded to them. And I read that out in part 2, so I'm not going to read it again. If you want to know what he said in terms of the hospitality of the peoples that he was amongst, you can go back to part 2, all right, or just read the Niger Valley Exploration Party official report. So Baba Martin Delaney does not say that he was run out of the country, and despite whether or not he had this negative experience of being beaten up or not, he spoke about the extreme cordiality, and hospitality of the brothers and sisters on the African continent, and more specifically among the Yoruba yeah, in general. Answered in terms of dealing with reality and what reality we are actually trying to deal with. As African people, one of the reasons why Pan-Africanism is seen as necessary is because we are dealing with a pan-European axis that has been facilitated the enslavement of African people, the colonization of African people, and the neo-colonization of African people around the world. The English don't do this in isolation of the French, in isolation of the Spanish, in isolation of the Dutch, in isolation of the Belgians, in isolation of the Portuguese, etc., etc., etc. They collaborate and unify in relation to these agendas, yeah? And I didn't mention the United States of America just a minute ago, but they are very much included in that axis. And that axis today is a geopolitical entity known as the West. And the West is as a geopolitical entity is the formation that houses the interests, yes, of Western Europe and its extensions around the world in the United States of America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc., etc., etc. And from that axis, they dominate world politics, yeah, world economics, yeah, to the detriment of African people in this regard, okay? And so we have two options in this, in relation to this. We can either seek to prove ourselves to the empire and become part of the empire, or challenge it based upon our goal of self-determination, autonomy, and sovereignty. And the revolutionary Pan-African ideal suggests that we should do the latter. But in order to do the latter, we need to identify our largest social aggregate, because people power is an essential component of any warfare, yeah, and all forms of warfare. And so from sorry, kings and queens, technicals, I'm gonna stop this playing in a second, but let's get back into the thing. We can either seek to prove ourselves to the empire and become part of the empire, or challenge it based upon our goal of self-determination, autonomy, and sovereignty. And the revolutionary Pan-African ideal suggests that we should do the latter. But in order to do the latter, we need to identify our largest social aggregate, because people power is an essential component of any warfare, yeah, and all forms of warfare. And so from an African point of view, yes, from a Pan-African point of view, it is identified that our largest social aggregate is our Africanness, yeah, that there is a geopolitical entity that we refer to as African, that we seek to employ towards our sovereignty and our self-determination to develop a nation of our own that is strong enough to protect our own interests, especially in relation to those who are attempting to oppress and colonize us, yeah? And so the only question here is not whether this is realistic or not. It's entirely realistic. It's as real as the fact that there is a West, that there can be and needs to be an African sense of nationhood in order to challenge that geopolitical entity. That's reality. So there's no question about whether that's real or not. The only question is whether we are going to accept that reality or not, and whether we are inspired enough, dedicated enough, convicted enough to work and fight for that goal, or if our interests lie in becoming a part of the American project or the British project or the French project as elite assimilated Africans within those institutions and those geopolitical entities. Those are our options.
Thank you,
and clearly we're going to choose one or the other. All right, so you see the point I was making there. I'm just going to support the point by praying on the wisdom of Baba Kwesi Pra, who is a linguist and so-called anthropologist from Ghana, who currently lives in South Africa. And he says in his book, Anthropological Prisms, Studies on African Realities, this point cannot be underemphasized. One of the most important challenges facing anthropology in Africa today is identifying optimal cultural units on the basis of which development efforts can be constructed. And so the point here is that one of the under colonialism, anthropology became a science of tribes in cultural contact and the process of acculturation. Yeah, administrative principles which are methodologically constructed along lines of proliferated divisions facilitated the process of colonial rule. The segmentary lineages became instruments of colonial administrative policy. Yeah. So the idea is that if the divisions that are called tribal among us are being used, yeah, as a means to divide, then we need to find means of overcoming those divisionary policies. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's a very simple point. And if anybody has studied not just reading African history, but studying Pan-African theory, ideology, and practice, then they would understand that. But again, a lot of the problem here is that a lot of the conversation is not centered around or taking place in the context of political education. Yeah, political education appears to be very low on the list of priorities, yeah, for these members of the so-called conscious community who want to rail against the Pan-African ideology, theory, and practice. All right, so I'm just pointing that out. You know what I'm saying? I'm just pointing that out, and we are going to move on. I'm going to skip a piece here for the sake of time, and we're going to get into another part of the conversation. Pay attention to the spirit, yeah, of the conversation also. All right, pay attention to the spirit of the conversation.
You know that's not true.
That's different. But for me, for him to say blacks were selling blacks, and that is conclusive, I do not hold that position.
No.
Let me say something.
So he's asking me, where is my source for me not to hold that position?
Let me say something, please, Garfield. Yeah.
But you said Dr. Beckles, so he wants you. You have the same book he's talking about, because I'm gonna let Chakara see.
I have
So I've skipped quite a bit just to say the conversation has moved on, yeah, to Mr. Vegas, and that is the Mr. Vegas, yeah. Heads high, Mr. Vegas, yeah. Making a point in challenging Raborn about his narrative about Africans having sold Africans into enslavement, and he's making the point that this is a card, yeah, that that Western governments are using in order to negate the reparations agenda. And he's used the work of brother Hilary Beckles, yeah, the scholar, economist, and reparations activist from Barbados, to make the point. Yeah, now there's a bit of confusion as to which specific text from Hilary Beckles that Mr. Vegas is referring to. Raborn seems to believe that that Hilary Beckles has only written one book. So when Mr. Vegas referenced Hilary Beckles, Raborn said he's got the book and he doesn't reference what Mr. Vegas is saying he references. Yeah. So let's check this out, and I'm going to come back to the argument in a second.
I want Raborn and Vegas to finish what they're doing right now, so other people can speak. But I'm gonna let you chime in for a quick second.
Oh, it's on this point, right?
Okay.
The issue is not, because look, in any form of oppression among any people anywhere, you are going to find collaborators among the oppressed group. Yeah? The idea that collaborators on the African continent are somehow worse than any other collaborators anywhere else is a narrative that is designed for a political purpose. It has little to do with the historical accuracy of the thing, because if it was about the historical accuracy of the thing, that the fact that Africans on the continent were fighting against and resisting the same thing, the same enslavement process, would be something that people would factor more into their narrative. But it tends not to happen that way there. Yeah. And so when we see it going that way, we understand what it's for. It's designed to create, to give people an excuse to create a separation between themselves and Africans on the continent for the sake of curry favoring or finding other opportunities, quote unquote, in whatever other Western formation, or because some African people feel like because they're closer to Westerns and Europeans and somehow further away from Africans that they're better than Africans on the continent. Or
to extenuate the abuse against Africans.
Exactly, right? And first of all,
this type of narrative I'm due.
Me never did want to interrupt you a while ago, you know. It's just that me I listen to you from a little and I grow. And so from the area of voice, I forgive you some flowers, King, because you know what I mean.
No man, big up yourself.
Long time I listen to you and all these things. And so we realize say you, and we just want to say big up because you know, I listen to the eye from a little, you know what I mean? So we just want
people, man, enough people, but we come and we learn the thing, and we learn from God.
And that was and we see a growth, and we see
and we learn from Ben Youssef, and we learn from Dr. Clark and
that we say, and that we say.
So everybody. So when we see people like
just to say, if you're not aware of Mr. Vegas's growth and development, Mr. Vegas has been studying some things, yeah. And so if you've seen him move over the last few years, you will know that he's developed a significant African-centered sensibility. So I was just honoring him for that. Still, you know what I'm saying? We're gonna be. Bear with me, kings and queens. It's all gonna make sense in a sec. Yeah, just bear with me.
Rather coming up and regurgitate the same narrative that prevent us from even forming any form of
now I'm gonna cut you off again. You're not gonna call me Rod dead. You're dead because in order for you to hold the position and have a conversation with me about what we're talking about history,
let's go to the book.
If you say you don't agree with me, you sound like a Christian right now.
Go to the book. You can always say what you want to say,
yo, bro, come on, man. You can chant all you want. That shit don't mean nothing. You need to stay in your lane, bro.
I'd rather to sound like a Christian.
Listen, man. All I need you to yo, Vegas, that I'm not gonna. I'm gonna keep talking. As long as you talk, I'm gonna keep talking. You're not gonna do what you did to Reggie. I'm not that.
Do this to say.
You're not gonna talk about. You're not gonna talk over me. I'm not gonna let you do it. So you might as well stop talking. I'm gonna keep talking, bro.
And Vegas, you have the book. Vegas, you have the book?
Yeah, I got the book. Nowhere in that book does it say anything about what this brother is talking about. That's why I want to know why you brought that book up. That didn't make any sense. That book doesn't deal with the entitled history of the slave trade. It talks about the Caribbean. He gives you a general aspect of what took place, and he's following the reparations movement. And again,
it does address the narrative though in relation to the reparations.
I don't change the narrative. Yo, fam, first
sorry, no, but you're misrepresenting the point, brother.
Y'all keep cutting me off, bro.
I'm not sure if you're in a position to make that accusation. I'm simply contextualizing why Mr. Vegas brought up the point.
I get the point, but the point, yo, hold on, bro.
Wait a
minute, bro. Wait a minute, man. If you don't got the book, do you got the book? And then we can have the conversation. Did you read this book?
Excuse me.
Did you read this book? Yes or no, brother?
Yes, I have read the book, my brother.
Okay, so tell me what that got to do with the book.
I'm simply, I'm telling you now, and if you would not interrupt me, then you would know.
No,
hold on a second. Hold on. Everybody stop. One mic. Mr. Vegas, do you have Hillary Bickle's book in front of you right now?
All right, so I'm playing all of that, yeah? Just so you can see the dynamics while going in the conversation, right? So it came to light that Rawborn and Mr. Vegas were talking about two different books. One is this book, yeah, Britain's Black Debt, Reparations for Caribbean Slavery and Native Genocide by Hilary Beckles, yeah. This is the book that Rawborn thought Mr. Vegas was referring to. Mr. Vegas was actually referring to Hilary Beckles' new book, How Britain Underdeveloped the Caribbean. Okay. And so Mr. Vegas is referencing that book in relation to challenging the narrative in relation to African collaboration with Europeans and suggesting that this is dangerous argumentation because it affects our reparations claim. Okay. Rawborn is arguing that Hilary Beckles in this book doesn't bring the argument. Rawborn is incorrect. And I was like, you heard me say, I do have the book. And when I was about to explain what the argument is in the book, Brother Garfield interrupted me to redirect the conversation back to Mr. Vegas, right? And Rawborn exclusively, okay? All right, so let's go into the excerpts of this book that, and apologies, because I don't have a PDF of this book, but I do have the book, so I'm going to read from it. And if anybody has the book, yeah, I'm going to read the page numbers that I'm reading from, and you can confirm that it's in the book. Okay. All right. So starting on page 167 at the bottom of the page and going on to page 168, yeah, he says denial of the rightness of the reparations case has been persistent. State officials argue that if colonial governments made genocide, slave raiding, and slavery legal, then there is no case to answer. No crime was committed. The question of authority is important. From which source was the British state invested with the authority to impose a genocidal policy upon the native peoples of the Caribbean and the enslavement of millions of Africans against their will, and in the face of their persistent in the face of their persistent resistance? The natives fought back, they were crushed, the Africans rebelled, and they were massacred. The British state, in order to reinforce native dispossessions and African enslavement, committed continuous atrocities. Recognizing the overwhelming evidence that supports the case of African popular resistance to the slave trade, the British state has adjusted its arguments. It now suggests that there was complicity and cooperation in West Africa among political elites. The intention is to argue that alleged crimes against humanity were shared and that African states should be similarly targeted. This is the classic divide and rule defense, in which victims are blamed for their victimization. The complicity of some African leaders makes the British crime more rather than less heinous. The majority of African leaders over time opposed the slave trade. For this, they were destabilized and destroyed. To stand in the way of the slave trade, a business network based in European cities, sustained by a massive military might and driven by large financial corporations, was to invite political annihilation. African leaders were assassinated and states destroyed. Political borders were redrawn and communities that resisted were attacked with cannon. The few states that benefited in the short term as collaborators stood against their own The few states that benefited in the short term as collaborators stood against their own rebellious communities and eventually fell. There are striking similarities between the transatlantic slave trade and the international narcotics trade. I'm not going to go into that, for the sake of time. And it also says many West African states are intimidated by this official British argument and have weakened their stance on reparations. Some have abandoned support for the movement. The Caribbean world, however, is not a part of this dialogue. The importation of enchained Africans was the result of a commerce driven by British citizens and the British state. So you can see that the argument that Ra Bourne is saying that Hilary Beckles does not make in the book, he does actually make in the book. Right? The same argument that Mr. Vegas is suggesting is problematic for the reparations case. Hilary Beckles actually does address in this book, and we're going to go to another section at which he addresses the same point right here now. Hold on a second. Right. In fact, we're going to do two more. I'm going to be thorough on this one, because now we're getting to the practicalities of the issue. Now we're getting to how these argumentations affect reparations and other Pan-African initiatives in today's world. Okay. Right. This is from one page. Yes, it is. Javier Melaman. It's Britain's Black Debt, page 181. All right. And we're starting from the third paragraph. The revised. Okay, so now he's referring to the Abuja conference in 1993, and some of the dynamics that took place at the Abuja conference as a result of these argumentations. It says, central to the conference was the presentation of a revised version of Lord Gifford's 1993 Abuja paper. Sorry, this is not the Abuja conference. This is the conference in 2001. The Durban conference in 2001 that he's referring to here, The legal basis for the claims for African claims of reparations for the slave trade, presented by Abdel Baghi G. Jibril. The revised paper tackled two significant arguments presented by critics of reparations, namely that African people were willing participants in the slave trade and that reparations is an appeal to the conscience of the white world. The revised script noted that the argument presented to suggest that Africans themselves have participated in and benefited from the slave trade, and consequently enslavement of their kin and cousins could not stand any careful scrutiny or fair judgment. Africans have always resisted their enslavement by Europeans and through all means at their disposal. It stated, quote, this is from the report now, as a matter of fact, throughout history and in all nations, there have been those individuals who, for different reasons, acted against the interest of their communities. In this modern age, such individuals are referred to in derogatory terms such as traitors, spies, or collaborators with the enemy. If we use a rational categorization method, it will become all too graphic that those chieftains who were accused of selling their own people to Western slave traders do not fit under any of these categories, unquote. If in the first place, Gifford stated the accused chieftains were forced to betray their own kin by several factors that were beyond their control. Ironically, he said that, quote, the provisions of modern weapons to rival tribes and high manipulation of slave raiders left the accused poor African chieftains in a critical position. They were practically told, attack and enslave your neighbors, or you will be attacked and enslaved. It was also documented that on many occasions, the collaborating African chieftains themselves, together with their subjects, were also surrounded and enslaved by the same slave raiders that cooperated with them in their other raids. In respect of reparations as justice, the conference stressed the role of public activism as a necessary strategy to bring an end to illegal and immoral practices. Justice cannot wait. And I'm not going to bother to go on there. Okay, so we can see, yeah, that he goes on to challenge this same argument again, and there's another place that in which he does it, and I'm going to read that, and then we're going to done with this thing. Okay, with this aspect of the conversation, right? So he's dealing with another conference that took place in Barbados. No, not in Barbados. This is the same conference, Durban, yeah, in 2001. And he says the final plenary session was nothing short of disorderly, chaotic, and contentious. Delegations were prevented from making their reservation orally due to lack of time, interpretation facilities, and were encouraged to submit them in writing. As such, it was difficult to know which countries made reservations or what part or on what part of the text. This is now a proposal or a resolution on reparations that this conference in 2001 is attempting to pass. Yeah. And so it says the Kenyan ambassador made a final statement in support of reparations that drew applause and a standing ovation. She later remarked that she had done this for the Caribbean delegates who had good reason to feel let down by the outcome of negotiations among the West, the European Union, and the African group. By the African group, they're talking about the continental governments, okay? Which he distinguishes from African NGOs, who he said that were in support of reparations. It was clear then that the European Union, the West, and the African group had effectively agreed to bury the reparations matter, leaving the Caribbean group feeling embattled, and a sentiment shared by the African NGO movement and the African American observers present. Kofi Annan had set the tone for this outcome. The Americans had called the tune, the European Union, the West, and the West African governments had danced. Yeah, the dagger in the final resolution came with the insertion of the word should. Slave trading and slavery should have been crimes against humanity. The African delegates agreed that it was not a crime at the time. They were cowed by the false notion that the involvement of some chiefs as spies, traitors, and collaborators constituted African involvement. Despite the evidence presented that most of the African leaders and the majority of the people resisted the trade and did their best to demonstrate that in the face of overwhelming European military power, and so he goes on to list what was in the final declaration. The point I'm making here is that Mr. Vegas was absolutely correct that the argumentation of Brother Rawborn at this point in time, in terms of African involvement in enslavement and the denial of legitimate Pan-African movements on the African continent, confining their legitimacy exclusively to the United States of America, is very destructive and has real implications, in terms of the actual movements, that Africans are engaged in. But if you are not engaged in those reparations movements, then you will not be aware of those dynamics. There are other places in the book that I can cite where he deals with this issue. Okay, so Brother Rawborn has read the book, but is denying that Hilary Beckles addresses these issues when he expressively does. I hope ones are following what I've just done, because that was a little bit complex, but me hope you understand when we did just do a while ago, and we're gonna move on with the conversation. I'm gonna skip, to a particular place for the sake of time, and we're near the end, kings and queens. Don't worry, I get thrown off the panel soon. I do get thrown off the panel soon, so we're gonna get into the thing. Right, let's go to this point right here. And then I'm gonna play everything leading up to when I get dash off. And then we're gonna call it a night.
Over here, I think you need to know who you're talking to. You need to know that.
Tell you. Can I tell you something?
No, you can't say. No, you can't say cool.
I'm done now.
That's cool. Not your turn. Rob is done, right? Let's get to I think it's hold on.
Yo, my turn. Tell Vegas, yo, put the name of that. What's the name of that book?
Go ahead,
Let me go twice.
Yeah, what's the name of that book again?
Yeah, say cool. See, we actually not in the flying contest. We actually at a conversation before you get in the plane. You get on the plane, you start it up, you take off, you fly continents, and then you say, "Can I land the plane?" We're not having that type of conversation, right? I kind of appreciate Rawborn because he puts everything in its proper perspective, in its proper context. He don't pull no punches. He talked about a modified version of Pan-Africanism occurring in North America and what it actually did, and he saw stuff. So we understand that. This conversation is talking about the overall productivity of Pan-Africanism.
Boom.
I like the way they tried it. They came, they fought, they lost. And that's okay. So now we know what not to do. It's the hanger-ons to keep trying the same thing over and over and over again. Let me give you a little better example, right? When I was running corners and shops, right? Not to big up the shit because it was slap stupid, but I'm giving you an example where the listening audience might get this point. We'll come outside at a certain time. We'll try something. It'll either work or it won't work. If it didn't work, we do not come out the next day trying the same thing over and over again because your ass be locked up over and over again. We need to stop it. It's nothing wrong with Pan-Africanists and admitting that it just failed. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. It's time for goddamn adjustment. That's all. But you don't keep doing it. Man, why is you cutting in right now, bro? Whatever God you believe in, use it at this point. My point is, we do not keep doing the same things over and over again. We have a scientific mind. We're not playing this game. Or the African mind. What the hell is the African mind? We don't know. All Homo sapiens are fundamentally African. What are we saying here? We're talking about cultures. We're talking about tribes. We're talking about a whole lot of stuff that everybody wants to forget about. Knock it off. Make an adjustment. But we're not going to keep doing the same thing over and over again and say, cool for you. The only reason I didn't debate you, because I didn't want you to drag Diop's out into the middle of the street, mess up his whole thing, and I have to smash him, because you got to smash Diop's first to get you. I didn't want to do it. I suggest you leave Raw Born alone. I'm out. See how quick that was? Say, cool. I got in and I got out. Yeah, I learned, yo.
Hey, can I speak on?
Go ahead, Federated.
I didn't hear any sources in that last statement, though. I was waiting for the sources. You know what I mean? All right, so as you can see, I was being a bit cheeky there as well. Yeah, for the whole conversation, they might ask for sources. Ark speaking never provide one source from where I'm saying, and nobody now demand no sources. Yeah, the argument there is that Pan-Africanism has failed. It hasn't worked, so we need an adjustment. Now, Brother Sekou, as you heard, asked an adjustment to what? Yeah, what are we adjusting to when we abandon Pan-Africanism? Yeah, this is an illogical argument again, because all liberation processes are processes, not events. So because of the fact that the greater and more lofty goals of Pan-Africanism, particularly in its revolutionary and black nationalist formations, has not yet been achieved, is nonsense when you consider the fact that no group of African people anywhere in the world can be said to have achieved ultimate freedom and liberation, even if we're talking about from an assimilationist point of view. Okay, the activities that were being lauded of Baba Martin Luther King earlier doesn't mean that the Africans in America, Black Americans, are no longer experiencing any discrimination, any repression, and any disenfranchisement in the United States of America. In spite of the efforts of Martin Luther King, the oppression still exists. So why is it that we can hold on to that example, Brother Ark, and laud that example, but we must, based upon the fact that oppression still exists, in spite of the efforts of Martin Delaney, in spite of the efforts of Papa Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and in spite of the efforts of Mama Henrietta Vinton Davis and Queen Mother Moore, and in spite of the efforts of Mbuya Nehanda and Ya Asantewa, in spite of the efforts of Omowale Malcolm X and Mama Namzamo Madikizela Winnie Mandela, in spite of the efforts of Morris Bishop and Thomas Sankara, in spite of the efforts of Pierre Molele and Leonie Agbo Molele, and all the millions of Africans who have fought under a revolutionary or black nationalist Pan-Africanist agenda over the years, in spite of their efforts, there are certain battles that are still yet to be won. Why is it that that fact means that we should negate the fight rather than continue the fight? This is an illogical argument, yeah? And it's so illogical that we're not even going to spend too much time on it. And I'm going to skip again, yeah, to another point, and then we're on the home run. All right, we're on the home run after this particular point. All right. I wish Chief Funday was here as well, because I would have asked him to go in on the history of Sierra Leone a little piece, but we'll do that another day.
The rebel would have went into South Africa, and
so this brother is making a point, yeah, and it's a good point, and it's a factual point. One second. I wanna just give you some recommended reading on this point. I've skipped what the brother was saying, because he was interrupted and it goes round in circles. But he's making the point that the liberation movements on the African continent involved Africans from various different places supporting other Africans. Yeah, so I think he gave the example of Angola and South Africa and a couple other places whereby there was a collaborative effort from Africans from these various different nations to liberate each other. Yeah. And that is a fact. Yeah. One of the dynamics of the revolutionary 60s in terms of the African continent was the fact that Zimbabwe, the liberation fight in Zimbabwe in the 1970s, was a collaborative effort from what is called the frontline states. Yeah, so all the nations that surrounded Zimbabwe took part and helped Zimbabwe in their liberation fight against the settler colonists in Zimbabwe. The same is the case for South Africa. The same is the case for Angola and Congo. The same, and even the Osaja for Kwame Nkrumah was assisting Africans in West and Southern, Central, and East Africa in relation to their liberation fight. So he's given the example that when you look at the extent to which Africans were able to throw off the shackles of formal colonization, then you are looking at some of the successes of Pan-Africanism before those successes were ripped from our grasp and neocolonialism was imposed. And just as an example of that, yeah, you can read the book, yeah, Zimbabwe, Racism and the Land Question by D. Gazi, yeah, A Colonial Legacy. And it gives an example and it breaks down some of the reasons, for example, why the Lancaster House Agreement was signed in 1980 in Zimbabwe, and that land agreement was the agreement that said that the government couldn't redistribute the land or touch the land issue for a decade. Yeah, and that was a controversial signing, but the explanation that he gives is that basically the frontline states who were supporting Zimbabwe at the time didn't feel that they had the wherewithal to continue to wage the war, and so Zimbabwe was in a position where they had to either go it alone, yeah, or come to the negotiation table, basically, because the frontline states just basically didn't feel that they had the resources to continue that war. But the point is that the Zimbabwe the liberation was not just the Africans in Zimbabwe that were fighting; they were being supported by Africans from elsewhere. Okay, so he's making that point, yeah, and listen to the response to that point.
Possibly, most likely, I think they would have won because they had backing of Cuba back then. They had Cuba.
Oh, okay.
They had.
I got you.
Man,
Let me.
Bear in mind that's a fact that Africans in Cuba did also assist in a lot of these liberation fights on the African continent.
Hold on. I got you.
Hold on.
Hey, let me say this to everybody that's listening, right?
Hold on.
You have people who support the Pan-African mindset and who wants to see a reality of it coming true, and you have some people that's just being a realist. We're like, well, you're being negative. Listen, family, I live in the real world. I wish Pan-Africanism, I wish all the cultures could unite. I wish all of that. I do. But I'll be waiting to see, just like a.
You went out, Garfield.
Well, let me finish my thought. I know you went up.
Marcus Garfield, come take him up in the world.
Hold on.
Who in Shaka praying to the ancestors right now?
But let me
right.
finish.
Shango.
Y'all missing the key
We
point.
leave with arm. We leave with arm. We leave with Majuba. That's what we do with Majuba around here. That's what we do.
Shaka,
bro, finish your point.
Let me
Finish your point,
finish. What I'm saying is,
Mm-hmm.
I understand that you guys say, oh, it's not gonna be Pan-African. Look, you were.
No, you're missing the point. You just made the point. Don't even know it, yo. You said they would have won if not for the United States. The real point is we don't got enough fucking technology, science, and all that espionage shit to even pull it off, because they're gonna break it up. We can't protect ourselves.
So we discard our goals because we don't have the military power right now. That's what's going on.
Thank you.
Let me finish my point.
And then tell.
All right, so y'all heard that, yeah? That was an admission of sorts, yeah? So, the brother's making the point that the Africans who were collaborating with each other had successes, and they lost at the point at which the United States came in and backed all of the former colonizers, and basically we lost some battles, yeah? But we won some battles with a sense of a Pan-African military engagement, okay? And so Ankh is saying, but you just basically gave the justification. We can't win because we don't have the military power right about now, yeah? They've got superior military power, so we should negate the vision and the mission because we are not in a militarily powerful enough position. And so I asked, so you're saying, so we should negate the mission? I asked that, and he said, exactly. it's an admission of sorts, right? But my point is, I'm very glad that Nat Turner didn't have that mentality. I'm very glad that Cecile Fatima and Bookman and Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines and Christophe didn't have that mentality. I'm absolutely thankful that Chief Taki in Jamaica never had that mentality. I'm eternally grateful for the fact that Mboya Nahanda in what is now called Zimbabwe and Yaa Asantewaa in what is now called Ghana didn't have that mentality. That they couldn't win, so they should negate the liberation fight because the enemy has superior weaponry. Yeah, I'm glad. I give thanks every day. Tendai Mwadi, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe, that our ancestors had a mentality to fight and acquire what they needed rather than to adopt the defeatist attitude that they didn't have it yet, so let's stop fighting. Yeah, I give thanks for that every day. All right, we're on the last leg, kings and queens. Yeah, we're on the last leg. Stay tuned. So to clarify, there's one more historical point I want to deal with, and then I'm gonna answer some direct questions about modern day situations. Yeah. All right, let's go. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I know, but there's some things you gotta do first, though. Get your military up first.
Prior to getting your military up.
But how about trading? How about getting trading?
Hold on, everybody. Everybody stop. One mic. Reggie Marbury, come on in, man. You ain't talked the whole night. Come on in, Reggie.
Peace to the family. And so now we get down to the nitty gritty. And so you have to look at ideology. You have to look at the.
All right, so you hear that? This is Brother Reggie now. Yeah, Reggie has entered the fray, so to speak. All right.
The origins of Pan-Africanism, but you certainly have to look at the Pan-African conferences. And you have to look at the aims and objectives of the Pan-African conferences. That I could say is the best thinking of Pan-Africanism, the Pan-African conferences. Not what Garvey did, but with states, with members of Africans on the continent and Africans from the Caribbean, England, and America, conferencing on what to do about colonialization.
So the first question is, what is your justification for that statement? Yeah. We're looking at the Pan-African conferences, and he's using the wrong terminology. The Pan-African Conference is 1900. After that, what you have is Pan-African Congresses. And he's made a statement that the best thinking is to be found in the Pan-African Congresses and not what Garvey did. What is your justification for that statement? How do you substantiate that? He doesn't. Okay. And so I'm putting that question out there. How do you substantiate that Garvey is not to be engaged, yeah, in terms of the best thinking, but the Pan-African Congresses are, and why? And I think we're going to get some justification as to why he makes that statement, but not an actual justification. He's trying to make a particular argument, and centralizing the Pan-African Congresses allows him to make the argument that he's making. And listen.
First step, it was about what to do about colonialization. During the course of the meetings, of course, several African states, Britain gave a status to certain African states, right? Kwame Nkrumah was one of them, right? He became the head of Zimbabwe, and before Kwame Nkrumah, there was several others.
I'm going to assume that he misspoke. Kwame Nkrumah becomes the head of Ghana, not Zimbabwe, and before him there were not several others. There were only one, maybe two, if you count. Well, the one that was before Nkrumah, yeah, was Sudan, and anything that took place before Nkrumah, by many was considered to be a win for Arabs more specifically than it was Africans. Okay, but Sudan was 1956 in terms of independence. Ghana was 1957, and let me just check something to see if I'm correct here. 1 second. Yeah. So I was wondering whether another nation was before, but a North African nation, but yeah, it wasn't. It was after, yeah, Ghana. All right. So let's correct in that particular aspect of the history.
After that period, we find ourselves in something called neocolonialism, which was not what we actually expected. Then Africa ended up kicking us out with the Organization of the Organization of African Unity, and then the OU. So African Americans and African Caribbeans don't really have a standing in Africa because they kicked us out.
So again, I like this narrative that he's putting forward. He doesn't source it at all, yeah, and that's very problematic because he gives the impression that Africa kicked out African Caribbeans and African Caribbeans and African Americans, as though that's what took place, and that it's an oversimplistic narrative, if it is even true, yeah. And so yeah, but let's go forward and then we'll come back to that in a second.
We're not really seated and really have a conversation. And that is short-sighted of the Africans on the continent, who don't seem to want the African Americans' position, even though we were the people who were trafficked out, us and in Europe.
All right, so we see blanket statement: the Africans on the continent don't want the African Americans, and well, he didn't make reference to African Caribbeans at that point, but you know, he made reference to them before, so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt where this is concerned. But apparently, Africans on the continent, blanket statement, don't want us present. Yeah, okay. Let's go forward.
So when it comes to sources,
Reggie,
I think it's a common, if you hold a position, then you have to show where your position comes from, because none of this is our information. None of this we own. What
the eternal irony of the fact that he hasn't provided any sources for the statements that he's just made.
we own is sources that we have studied in our literature review. So I'm very close to Rob Bourne's position. But I'm trying to tease out what Mr. Vega's position is. And the last time I spoke to Mr. Vegas, I was trying to be very, very polite to him, right? He wasn't polite to me. So now it comes down to, if you're going to have a conversation about Pan-Africanism, you should cite your sources and your literature review, just so we have an idea of what the hell you're talking about. Okay, I'll stop for now. I'll come back in.
Hey, Reggie.
All right. So what we're gonna do, yeah, is just go to the works of Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah in the book, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. Previously, I've held up this book. Brother Reggie is the only person other than myself in this conversation to mention neocolonialism, although I don't think he contextualized it very well in that statement right there. So, but this is a very good book, yeah. If you want to understand what neocolonialism is, yeah. He says, cite your sources and your literary review so we know what the hell you're talking about, okay? So, and I doubt that most of the people engaged in this conversation have actually studied this text, all right? Kwame Nkrumah, Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, all right? I'm not going to quote from this one today, okay? Although it is essential reading. I'm not an Nkrumahist, yeah, as I've said before, but there's a lot that we can learn from the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, whether it's his virtues or his mistakes, yeah. But as far as the history of Pan-Africanism, especially during this period goes, if you want to understand what was going on, you can't really go wrong Sergeant for Kwame Nkrumah. Yeah, you can't go wrong him. All right. But we are going to go to another text from Sergeant for Kwame Nkrumah, which is probably, along with Neocolonialism, my favorite book and probably the most important text that he wrote. And this is the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. Okay, this is the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare by Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. And we're going to explore a few sections just to contextualize what Brother Reggie has said and correct some of the misinformation or the misrepresentation of Africans on the continent and the dynamics on the continent during that time. Okay. And this is the author's note. So this is the very first thing that you're going to read really in this book. Okay. As far as Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah is concerned. Now, bear in mind, this book, as you can see here, is written in 1968. Yes. This is 2 years after the Osagyefo has been overthrown. Yeah, in a coup sponsored by Britain, America, and a few other colonizers or neo-colonizers. Okay, so he's no longer president of Ghana. He is the co-president in Guinea alongside Secretary at this point. Yeah, and so he's still looking at ways to proliferate revolution in the African continent. Now, the author's note reads: this book has been written during my stay in Conakry. Previous notes I made for a manual of guerrilla warfare for African freedom fighters were left behind in Ghana when I departed for Hanoi on the 21st of February, 1966. The manuscript was handed over to the imperialist and neo-colonialist intelligence organizations by the military and police traitors. This handbook, presenting a completely new approach, will, I hope, help to make possible the successful completion of the armed phase of the African Revolution struggle for total emancipation and an all-African Union government. The Black Power movement in the USA and the struggles of peoples of African descent in the Caribbean, South America, and elsewhere form an integral part of the African political, military, revolutionary struggle. Our victory will be their victory also, and the victory of all revolutionary, oppressed, and exploited masses of the world who are challenging the capitalist, imperialist, and neocolonialist power structure of reaction and counter-revolution. Okay, so we do see here that as far as Kwame Nkrumah is concerned, Africans in the United States of America and the Caribbean and South America, etc., are very much part of the thing, right? Now, this book is essential reading. Yeah, I'm a Black nationalist, Pan-Africanist. I don't agree with everything that he says in the book, but it is important to understand what problems he and the revolutionaries that he was organizing with at the time were trying to solve. It's very important to study these things. All right, so this is part of the justification now for why the Pan-Africanist revolutionary movement was important at the time. They were addressing what nobody else in the conversation, apart from myself and Brother Sekou, seems to want to address, which was the geopolitical reality that is facing African people and that was very apparent to African people at this time in the 1960s and 70s, bearing in mind that Nkrumah passed away in 1972. He says, the Second World War seriously strained the political and economic strength of Europe, although capitalism as a system emerged relatively intact. However, the true winner of the whole contest turned out to be the United States of America. Having helped the Allies to win the war, the USA was from then on able to retain its preeminent position and to acquire increasing influence in the economic life of the exhausted European states. So a pan-European axis strengthened itself by pushing America to the forefront after mass European War II, misnomered World War II. All right. The internationalization or syndicalization this internationalization or syndicalization enabled US imperialism to forestall temporarily an incipient crisis by fulfilling two sine qua non conditions. One, the need to expand. The US-European post-war alliance not only enabled the USA to benefit from the advantages of the European market, which had hitherto been largely closed to its penetration. This is true. Yeah, you find these dynamics come up around Mass European War I as well, yeah, whereby, they're collaborating, but there's economic competition going on between them. America's trying to extend its influence, and Britain's trying to maintain its power as a preeminent colonizer and superpower of the world, yeah. And after Mass European War II, they couldn't maintain that anymore, all right? So they had to open up their thing to America, yeah, in order to say that America funded and sustained Europe for a significant period of time, yeah, after the Mass European War II, okay? Horizons, so penetration, but also open up new horizons in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where the US had already superseded European supremacy and established neocolonialist dominations. One of the key components of this is institutions like the United Fruit Company, which is today called Chiquita, yeah, which is they basically operated as an arm of the American government, yeah, throughout the early 1900s, and were used to mash up legitimate African liberation movements in the Caribbean during that period. Okay, so by the time we get to the 1960s, the America already has a stronghold in the Caribbean and South and Central America in terms of economic domination. Okay, two. So that one criteria is the need to expand, and two, the need to militarize. The militarization of the US economy, based on the political pretext of the threatening rise of the USSR and later of the People's Republic of China as socialist powers, enabled the USA to postpone its internal crisis during the Hot War, 1939 to 1945, and then during the Cold War, 1945 onwards. Okay, and he goes on to explain that. Just note these points. I'm establishing a train of logic that will become clear shortly. Yeah, so just note these points. I hope ones are appreciating and understanding where we're getting with this. Yeah, so we're looking at the geopolitical realities that are facing African peoples and how the West is recalibrating itself in order to impose itself on African peoples and the rest of the world. And then he goes on to speak in later on in the book about the need for Pan-African organizations. So bearing in mind what I've just said, Europe and America are collaborating to expand economically and militarily. Okay? And he says, in comparison, under the heading beneath Pan-African Organization, in comparison, the independent states of Africa are at present militarily weak. Unlike the imperialists and neocolonialists, they have no mutual defense system and no unified command to plan and direct joint action. But this will be remedied with the formation of the All African People's Revolutionary Army and the setting up of organizations to extend and plan effective revolutionary warfare on a continental scale. We possess the vital ingredient necessary to win: the full and enthusiastic support of the broad masses of the African people who are determined once and for all to end all forms of foreign exploitation, to manage their own affairs, and to determine their own future against such overwhelming strength. Organized on a Pan-African basis, no amount of enemies can hope to succeed. We should be able to end this part here, but I'm not going to, right? But so we see that there's a pan-European axis seeking to colonize and neo-colonize. The only viable response to that is for Africans to develop a pan-African axis to defend ourselves collectively, because Nigeria can't do it by itself, Ghana can't do it by itself, Congo can't do it by itself, Sudan can't do it by itself, Kenya can't do it by itself. Unless we collaborate especially coming from the fact that we are a group of nations underdeveloped by the colonialism that we have recently experienced. We need to develop some unifying mutual interests, yes, to collectively defend ourselves. Yeah, this is simple logic. Okay, all right. Now, and bear that in mind in relation to the fact that I've already said what the subject for reference at the beginning of the book in relation to Africans in America, the Caribbean, South America, etc. So he outlines three principles here: nationalism, Pan-Africanism, and socialism. It says our objectives are defined by three political components of our liberation movement: nationalism, Pan-Africanism, and socialism. Now, I'm a Black nationalist Pan-Africanist, and what he refers to as nationalism here is not necessarily what we refer to as nationalism from a Black nationalist perspective. So the words are differently applied depending on the context in which it's used. In this instance, he's referring to the attainment of sovereignty of the individual nation states. Yeah, it's a step in the right direction, and then those individual nation states must form a Pan-African alliance. When we say nationalism as Garveyites or universal African nationalism, we're talking about the ideal of nationhood of all African peoples. Okay, so we have to understand those nuances. But as a Black nationalist Pan-Africanist, we don't really deal with the socialism thing. Okay, but Nkrumah was what he identified himself as, a scientific socialist. All right, we are going to focus on the Pan-African objective. Okay. And if you want, the justification for the rest of it, then you're gonna have to read the book yourself. Okay, Pan-Africanism. The limitations of nationalism have already been acknowledged by most mature leaders of the liberation movement. But wherever the conditions for the transition to a higher ideological level and wider form of struggle were lacking, the necessary leap could not be made, and the nationalism was never transcended. Yeah, so that means that the allegiance to the colonial borders as they were currently constituted. All right. The true dimensions of our struggle were outlined at the 5th Pan-African Congress held in Manchester, England in 1945, when resolutions were passed specifying that the supreme objective of the national liberation movement was to pave the way to national reconstruction and to promote democracy and prosperity for the broad masses through an all-African... Good night, boys. We come. Sorry, kids and queens. I'm saying. All right. Where was I up to? Blah, 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 blah. Liberation movement was paved. Right. When the resolutions were passed specifying that the supreme objective of the national liberation movement was to pave the way to national reconstruction and to promote democracy and prosperity for the broad masses through all African struggle against colonialism and all the new manifestations of imperialism. No reference was made to neocolonialism as such, because this only developed on the mass scale in Africa after 1957. But the Pan-Africanism, which found expression in the Manchester Congress 1945 and the All African People's Conference 1958, was based on the age-old aspiration towards unity of all peoples of African origin, exploited as workers and as a race. African unity therefore implies that imperialism and foreign oppression should be eradicated in all its forms, that neocolonialism should be recognized and eliminated, that the new African nation must be developed within a continental framework. All right, now listen to this. You see these points here, especially the first two, yeah? You are not going to find the brothers and sisters who are challenging me in this discourse identify these things: imperialism and foreign oppression, that and neocolonialism. Yeah, they're not going to make these declarations. Okay, all right. There's a reason why. However, the specific content of the new social order within the developing African nations remains to be defined, and he would define this content of the new social order as socialism. And this is where me and Baba and Nkrumah would depart ideologically. However, we respect his efforts nonetheless. And another day, we'll go into what our ideological disagreements are. Today is not the day for that. However, continuing, and I hope ones are following the train of logic here and the train of argumentation here, the present stage of the liberation struggle. An objective appraisal of the degree of success so far attained in our struggle leads to the consideration of three theses of major importance. 1, the achievement of genuine independence by an African state is but a part of the overall process of continental decolonization. 2, no independent state is immune to imperialist intrigue, pressure, and subversion as long as imperialism under any guise is left free to operate on the African continent. 3, the degree of completeness of our victory over imperialism has a determining influence on how far post-independent reconstruction can go. In other words, the people will have no equitable share in national reconstruction and benefits unless the victory over imperialism and its colonist and neocolonialist stages is complete. All right. So there's a caveat here. Yeah, the degree to which certain things can go forward is reliant upon the degree of our successes in these stages of the battle. It's a process, not an event. It therefore follows that the unity of the African people expressed in a union government is necessary. A, to accelerate the liberation struggle in territories still under colonial domination. B, for the security of already independent states, and particularly for those which have chosen to follow a line of total opposition to imperialism. C, to protect the flanks of our drive towards socialist domestic reconstruction. These considerations should be able to serve as 1, a basic formula to link up with all aspects of the anti-imperial struggle in Africa. 2, a blueprint for the people's action. And 3, a yardstick for the evaluation of political development and phases in the history of Africa. Okay. Right. So now we're going to get to some problems. Yeah. Right. Now we're going to get to some problems. And this is kind of what Brother Reggie was alluding to, without much contextualization. Yeah. So he made a blanket statement that Africans on the continent didn't want nobody in the diaspora to be messing with them. But he doesn't contextualize it in relation to the fact that not all Africans on the continent, especially as it relates to the neocolonial states, wanted a revolutionized Africa in the first place. The revolutionary Africans were battling other non-revolutionary Africans on the continent. The dichotomy here was not between the African diaspora and the African continent. The dichotomy was between those who had a more revolutionary radical ideal and those who had a neocolonial ideal. That was the contradiction. Sham independence and the unity movement. Few were deceived by such a deliberate and obvious stratagem. Imperialism was merely using the device of sham independence to prepare the African terrain to suit its own convenience and to avoid a direct and costly confrontation with the liberation movements. It was therefore not surprising that the divisions of opinion on the question of unity expressed at Saniquile were much more evidence during the second conference. That's the All African Peoples Conference. Yeah, one was held in Ghana, another one was held in Nigeria. Sorry, not Nigeria, Algeria. And then we're talking. Then he goes on to talk about the second conference of independent African states in Addis Ababa in 1960. At this conference, the pivot of African unity was seen no longer as a firm political union, but merely a loose policy of cooperation between African states. Moreover, the concept of regional groupings between states was endorsed. Yeah, so he's saying now that when at one point there was a more hardline approach, yeah, to a more firm unity, and at this conference it became evident that not everybody was about that life. All right, that resolve had weakened at this point. 2, the principle of a collective foreign policy, as agreed upon in Accra in 1958, gave way to the principle of separate foreign policies for each state. In this way, imperialists gained more room for maneuver, for infiltration, and for stirring up difficulties between African states. They also were responsible for stirring up difficulties between Africans on the continent and Africans in the diaspora. Listen to a speech by Omowale Malcolm X called The Prospect for Freedom, where he speaks about the fact that the American government was sending, Negroes. He says, Uncle Toms. These Toms went over there. And he said, you're not supposed to call them Toms nowadays because they'll sue you. So he said, so they sent these uncles over there, yeah, to basically undo, yes, a lot of the work of the more radical revolutionary Africans from America. Okay, the CIA, another book. This is, since we're sourcing nowadays, yeah, let's profile the next book. Yeah, White Malice, the CIA and the neocolonization of Africa. The CIA established organizations, yeah, and funded some black people in America with an anti-Pan-African agenda who are working on behalf of the American state, yeah. And a lot of that information is documented in this book. It's quite a thick book, but luckily you have the audio book there as well if you want some further information. All right. So check that out, kings and queens. All right. So we see that there is a battle taking place on the African continent in relation to the revolutionary ideals versus the neocolonial ideals, and the neocolonial ideals are obviously being funded by superpowers of the world. Yes. Okay. 3, it was agreed that assistance to the Algerian liberation struggle was to take the form of diplomatic pressure on France, but was to bypass official recognition of the GPRA, and I forget exactly what that. The Algerian Provisional Government. In plain words, diplomatic shilly-shallying was to take the place of genuine anti-imperialist confrontation. So there was even a weakening of the extent to which some of these African states were prepared to support each other in the anti-colonial or anti-neocolonial liberation fight. Okay, therefore, as early as 1960, a wide gulf between those independent states which favored cooperation with imperialism and those which proclaimed an unflinching offensive against it. Yeah, bearing in mind these things, yeah, and he goes on to talk about genuine independence and sham independence. You have to note the difference between these things. Okay, so we're getting to the end of this part. The Organization of African Unity, all right, sorry. Now, Brother Reggie mentioned the Organization of African Unity and says that it kicked us out. I need him to source that and, substantiate what he's saying there. But the Organization of African Unity was a massive compromise in terms of the radical and the revolutionary upstanding Pan-African vision. Yeah. And you have to contextualize it if you're going to make these statements. The militant African forces did achieve a certain amount of success when all blocks and groups joined together to form the OAU at Addis Ababa in 1963. However, appearances are sometimes deceptive. The dissolution of pro-imperialist groups did not mean that the interest they represented had also vanished. On the contrary, an examination of recent events exposes serious weaknesses within the OAU. I want you to understand what's happening here. The Osagyefo for Kwame Nkrumah himself is critiquing the OAU. So this is not an Africans on the continent unified in the OAU throughout Africans in the diaspora. Where did that happen? The organization failed to solve the crises in the Congo and Rhodesia, both of them test cases. The former involving a direct challenge to neocolonialism, and the latter open confrontation with a minority settler government. So the OAU failed, yes, to address what was happening in the Congo and what was happening in South Africa, and support the Africans who were fighting back against the colonizers and neocolonizers in those places. Yeah. In fact, the OAU is in danger of developing into a useful cover for the continued sterile action of conflicting interests. The only difference being that in the context of one big brotherly organization, reactionary tactics are camouflaged and applied through subtleties of negotiation. He goes on, over here, the radical states of the OAU were confronted with the difficulty of finding effective expression for the aspirations of the broad masses of the people. The struggle seemed to unfold in two different spheres. The one in the streets, villages, workshops, and factories, and the other in the hushed and closed atmosphere of air-conditioned houses and offices. In this situation, the genuine threat of imperialism and its neocolonialist agents tended to be underestimated, and the progressive states placed too much reliance on the OAU. Yeah. So when we talk about Africans in the diaspora having difficulty with the OAU, Africans on the continent were also having difficulties with the OAU. Why would we not factor this into our analysis, Brother Reggie? Why would we not do that? Yeah. So a solution. Yeah. What is Asante Kwame Nkrumah suggesting? Revolutionary warfare is the logical, inevitable answer to the political, economic, and social situation in Africa today. We do not have the luxury of an alternative. We are faced with a necessity. And so as a result, he proposes political military organization. The following measures should be taken: the formation of the All African People's Revolutionary Party to coordinate policies and direction, and 2, the creation of an All African People's Revolutionary Army to unify our liberation forces and to carry the armed struggle through to final victory. Just to note that the All African People's Revolutionary Party still exists today. They have a branch in the UK. I grew up organizing with these brothers and sisters. And even us, though we disagree with them as black nationalists ideologically, they're scientific socialists or Nkrumah Tourists. Yeah. And, you know, we have our debates. But many black nationalists actually went through the AAPRP's political education and study program. Yeah. That was developed by the great ancestor, Baba Kwame Ture. Okay, so as much as we disagree, we have our points of confluence and we collaborate with each other. All right, so I hope ones and ones appreciate what I've just done there. And we're going to continue with the conversation. I'm going to wrap it up shortly. All right, we're going to wrap it up shortly. Let me just stop sharing this. Now, again, you're not going to get that kind of a history espoused by these brothers and sisters. I'm just using this as a case study. Yeah, we're just working through some of the history. Yeah, and exploring some of the issues that are not going to be explored by in a conversation such as this. Yeah. Okay. Let us get to another point, and then we're basically on the last leg, and I'm gonna deal with the question of how African liberation, the politics on the African continent, relates to politics in the United States of America. We do right. Okay, so but let's hear from Brother Sekou, and then we're gonna more or less play to the end, so we can get. I want you to hear Brother Sekou's response to all of this to contextualize what's gonna come next. Yeah, because a lot of smoke and mirrors was taking place here. Like earlier in the conversation, they told Brother Sekou to focus on Africa, and then when he starts focusing on Africa, they start cussing him and telling him, well, why are you talking to us about Africa for? So it's an interesting dynamic. But let's
the show anyway. We've been on for almost 3 hours. The host, I'll make you the host.
And this blood,
because I'm about to. All right.
I'm soon going still, but yeah.
Fuck that. Listen, you want to be the host? I'll make you the host. It's Zoom.
We know show, bro.
I'll make you the host then. So who want to be the host? Come on, somebody, come on, be the host, and I'll let you smoke to give up. I got things to do. I got to debate.
I check up in the morning over here, so
it's my turn to speak, Garfield.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brother Sekou. Go ahead.
Yeah, go. I'm giving you 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay.
You have 10 minutes, Sekou. Go on through. 10 minutes, yeah. Go on through.
So, just talking about you see how hype he got, yo. I wonder if he's rubbing his hands together like, ooh.
Sekou, go ahead, Sekou.
I think this whole thing boils down to those who are pessimistic, those who are optimistic, and those who want to claim to be realists, but in reality, they are pessimistic.
I'm gonna humbly suggest to Brother Sekou that it's not even a matter of pessimism; it's a matter of defeatism. Yeah, it's. But anyway, let's continue.
So, but something one brother said. He said the reality. What is the reality of the black man today on the planet? We all know it. The condition of Africa, if you mention all these pessimistic ideas, the question you're still left with is, what's the best option for the black race on the continent? You can't run away from it. We should remain in Cote d'Ivoire to be called the coast of Ivory. We should remain in all these nations created by the Berlin Conference in 1885.
Now, bear in mind, they spent the whole conversation telling him that Africans on the continent can't unite. Do it on the African continent, maybe we'll join. Africans on the continent can't even get together and have a conversation without throwing chairs at each other. You should stop talking to us in America. And they said all this. So he's now talking about, well, what should we do on the African continent? Should we just go along with what they've outlined for us, or should we challenge it, right? This is the point that he's making now. And see how the conversation.
We should remain there in the European imagination. All you pessimistic scholars, and say, let's stay there, let's be scientific. What you call scientific? What is unscientific in creating an ideology to create a super state? When the United States that you are looking at, there are Germans there who are white people, there are French people there are Italians, there are British. You all came together, they fought, and then they decided that they brought all these states together to create a super state, a powerful United States. You are saying it's unrealistic.
This is the most important part of the conversation. All right. If you're gonna sign off, don't sign off right now. This is the most important part of the conversation. All right.
Because there are tribes there. I see it as a crying people who are pessimistic, trying to be lazy, looking for a free way out. The ancestor who coined this philosophy, they knew that there are challenges, but they know as well that whenever a philosophy is created, there are a lot of branches that come out of it. Pan-Africanism, when it was created until today, it has made some progress. It has created a cultural branch that you call Afrocentrism today, that has become an academic wing that has influenced the African educational system and culture, that has led to decolonization in some universities. It has created some of the independent states that you're talking about. Kwame Nkrumah, if he was not educated by Pan-Africanism, he won't even understand how to create the Organization of African Unity. It was the Pan-African education that influenced these people.
All right, thank you. All right.
So you know, it's when Sekou talk, yeah, the timing gets stricter at it, yeah. The timing gets stricter up lower. All right, now bear in mind, yeah, we're in an order. After Sekou is supposed to speak, yeah, he's just been stopped based upon timing, right? It's supposed to be my turn to speak. Watch what happens.
Garfield, can we ask him just one question if he can answer? Yo, where did Kwame Nkrumah get his education from on this and dealing with black scholars?
Harlem, baby, Harlem.
No, I'm not asking you. I'm not asking you. I'm asking Sekou.
Right. So you heard me say in the background, yeah. Some American exceptionalism. So the idea is that they always do this, right? And Nkrumah learned in Harlem, America. Yeah, this is a typical ADOS FBA argument as well. And it's surprising how all of these conscious community people adopt these ADOS FBA argumentation. All right. So somehow Nkrumah is nothing until he gets to Harlem in New York, and that's where he learned his thing from. Yeah. They also follow say Marcus Garvey failed, or the Jamaicans didn't want to deal with Marcus Garvey until he got to America. And when we again, as I've already said in previous videos, right, we take nothing away yeah, from the valiant effort of Africans in America and the contributions that have been made, the many contributions that have been made to our liberation fight, without whom we wouldn't be where we are today. We wouldn't have the rich legacy that we have today. But why is it necessary, yeah, to promote this American exceptionalist ideal within the Pan-African movement? Why is that necessary? Yeah, and that's what's taking place at the moment. So listen to this.
Kwame Nkrumah wrote a book called Conscientism. In there, he said he has read all books, but the opinions and the writing of Marcus Garvey has inspired him than any other book he has ever read.
Yeah, he said that in his autobiography, Ghana. So now, bear in mind, yeah, it's supposed to be my 2 minutes to talk. All right, Rabul has interrupted to ask Sekou a question. He's asked Sekou the question. Sekou's answered the question. Now I'm trying to speak. Yeah, and watch what happens. Same time though,
we are not.
By the way, the statement that Brother Sekou is speaking about actually is in Ghana. You know, the autobiography of Kwame Nkrumah. I believe it's like page 50 something, page 58 or something like that. He makes that statement on.
Dumb, Rabon.
It would take nothing away from Nkrumah to have learned a lot from Africans in America or anywhere else in the world, because that would be entirely within the Pan-African ethos and principle, right? So you see that, yeah? As Africans, Pan-Africanists, we're supposed to learn from brothers and sisters around the world, especially when we go amongst them, yeah? Nkrumah was living in the United States of America studying. Of course, he's going to draw a whole leap, yeah, from the movements that were developing in the United States of America during that time. He's there in the 1930s. Yeah? Harlem's hot in the in the 1930s. He is going to draw a lot from that experience, and it takes nothing. In fact, it's a credit to Nkrumah that he's able to absorb that experience. Yeah, right. Learn from the brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Yeah, and utilize that when he goes back home to what becomes known as Ghana. That should be a credit. But somebody wants to use it to gloat and negate, yeah, the what he would have learned from Africans on the continent. So J.E. Casely Hayford don't exist. Kobina Sechi don't exist. There's 2 Africans from the nation of Ghana who were on bits prior to the attention for Kwame Nkrumah. And the fact that he learned from those Africans on the continent doesn't take away from the fact that he learned from those Africans in the United States of America. So why should the fact that he learned from those Africans in the United States of America take away from what he learned from those Africans on the continent?
Right. I get.
Excuse me.
Sakura, I asked you
in the world, because that would be entire. It would take in his autobiography, Ghana. At the same time, though,
we are not dumb, Rabon.
It would take nothing away from Nkrumah to have learned a lot from Africans in America or anywhere else in the world, because that would be entirely within the Pan-African ethos and principle, right?
Right. I get.
Excuse me.
Sakura, I asked Sekou a question and I wanted him to answer. Sakura,
he answered it. It's not time to speak.
Sakura, and it's incorrect.
He
That's
answered
not
it.
the answer. The answer is the Harlem History Club. Do you understand what they were doing in there? Do you know about the Harlem History Club? Do you know what they were doing there?
My brother, yeah.
Come on, man, stop playing. Again, yo, stop. Hey, yo, listen. Say
no
cool.
Doubt.
Stop. Hold on, man. I want to finish talking to say cool, man. Stop calling black people.
So bear in mind, yeah, him just speaking a while ago, you know, and Sekou speaks positively now, and then I want to interrupt right now. Him want going a statement now to Sekou, yeah. This is the order, yeah, taking place on the panel right about that.
Pessimistic without knowing our history. Everything you saying. I'm talking. You keep talking to us about Africa. Yeah, we are the descendants of them people. We're talking about right here, right now, and what it is that's going on. And when we're talking about our history, and you looking at San Malo and those Maroons that are here, with his black woman, Cecilia, the Dismal Swamps, Back Creek, all of those things right here, no matter where we were at in the Americas, from Gaspayango, from Domingo Bio, all the way down, son. We fought these people to the death, bro. And we did both things. One people wanted to revolt, the other people were revolting by using the political system. And this is the direction we chose to go in. So when you keep saying, yo, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? We decided what we was gonna do. We decided that we staying here. We made that declaration in 1835 in the first national organization in America, the Negro Color Convention. We ain't going to no Africa. You know what I'm saying? So now when we
now you notice, yeah, that Brother Sekou never said nothing about you have to come to Africa. He never said nothing about that. Yeah, he never said nothing. He never told Rabon or Ankh or Garfield or anybody on the panel that you must go to Africa. Brother Sekou himself at the moment is not living in Africa. He's living in Canada. So where did this argument come from? Complete straw man.
When we talking about this, Ankh is saying something real clear. In order for any revolution or any revolt to be successful, you have to educate the people that are around you. You have to be able to.
Which is why political education and cultural reorientation is one of the primary, if not the primary, activities that is engaged in by Pan-African organizations for the past generation. Just pointing that out. But if you're actually engaged in Pan-African work, then you would know that.
To provide the food, clothing, shelter, and education, and deal with the needs of the people so that you could politicize them to have this vast view. We saying that we got to handle what we need to handle here first before we go into these endeavors. You have people that's doing it, and we support you. You got grassroots people that's Pan-Africanists over here that's going on. That's fine. All power to you. But what I'm saying, listen. Hold on.
You're my time. You're my time. You already spoke like for 20 minutes.
To finish my
you
point.
already spoke for 20 minutes.
I just need 5 seconds to finish my point. You don't say nothing with Sekou talking. Let me get 5 seconds. In our communities where we live at, we don't.
But it was not your time to talk.
Yo, I'm not done, bro. Come on.
Yeah, it was actually my time.
I just need 5 seconds. Okay. I just need 5 seconds, bro. We don't own our stores. We don't own the real estate. We don't own none of that. And you sitting here telling us to keep looking over some other place when we need to be doing that right here.
So nobody, including Brother Sekou, has told anybody to look over to any other place and not focus on what they need to focus on right where they are. And just as a point, as far as Harlem is concerned, the people, the person that he's credited with the buy black and the develop black business agenda in Harlem, New York, is a man by the name of Carlos Cooks, yeah, who's a Garveyite, and the founder of the Universal African Movement in the United States, which was based in Harlem, New York. Okay, Pan-Africanist. He was also engaged in international affairs and activities. Just pointing that out for the sake of information.
That's still Pan-Africanism. You don't need to go to Africa to be a Pan-Africanist, bro. And this is what we're saying. So when you're talking about this unified thing, we done did it for over 200 years. And it's not that part right there.
But
brother,
you're speaking like you're speaking about repatriation. But there are other movements that black people can form. You understand what I'm saying? Where we can actually petition.
I agree with you with that, Mr. Vegas.
Hold on, brother. Hold on.
I know. I'm telling you, I agree with you. But I'm just suggesting to say
for you to be saying.
So you see the straw man in here, Mr. Vegas identify. So Rawborn is misrepresenting what Brother Sekou was saying. Brother Sekou wasn't talking about repatriation. You must go to Africa if you're a Pan-Africanist. They were the ones who made that stipulation when they identified that Marcus Mosiah Garvey hadn't been to Africa. Yeah, they were the ones, yeah, who made this. Stipulated the standard that in order to engage in Pan-African organizing, you had to go to Africa. Brother Sekou never said nothing about you must go to Africa. Him never tell nobody to go to Africa. And Mr. Vegas is identifying that. And by the way, a book on Carlos Cooks, yeah, if you want some sources and some information, Carlos Cooks, yeah, and Black nationalism, yeah, from Garvey to Malcolm. And it's compiled and edited by Robert Harris, Nyota Harris, and Grandassa Harris. Yeah, so a book on Carlos Cooks for your information. All right, you know it's yeah. We get me? We are sauce. Everything a blow. All right.
For you to be saying there is no hope for black people, so we should just get along and go along.
I never said that. Why
That's
you saying I'm saying that? I never said that. Stop saying that.
And you're talking about revolution, and brother, we are not stupid. We know that we can't fight no revolution
listen,
with the Europeans.
Can you stop saying
what we're saying is what we're saying? You just said
Mr. Vegas, Mr. Vegas, could you tell me that I said that there's no hope for black people in America? Where did I say that?
You're saying basically we can't do it, whatever.
No, what I'm saying is
they're saying that it's unrealistic.
What I'm saying to you, no, I'm not saying that.
Now, you remember, you've literally heard them saying it's unrealistic, yeah, for the better part of 2 hours. I don't know, I'm saying them, I said that. All right,
saying to you is this.
Y'all are being realistic.
Brother, the focus on Africa, if you listen to Sekou's segment.
No, but he's not talking about repatriation, bro.
He's talking to us about Africa and African affairs, bro.
That's what I'm
talking about. We need to deal with.
Shock horror. Brother Sekou is talking about African affairs. How dare he speak to us about African affairs? Why can't we speak about African affairs? I'm confused. Why is a man so incensed by a brethren talking about African affairs? And why does him talking about African affairs mean that you must pick up your bag and go to Africa immediately? Where you get that from? Complete fabrication I go on.
What we need to deal with right here in America, bro.
The African affairs are not exclusive to the African continent.
Exactly.
And this is a
exactly.
So Shakara.
This is an illusion.
What does gentrification?
This is an illusion.
Listen. I'm gonna be quiet right now. I'm gonna be quiet right now. Listen, I'm gonna be quiet. This is the question for the floor. So gentrification and the wealth gap between black and white has something to do with the political movements in Africa. Please make that make sense to me. I'll wait.
Yeah, if you understand that the concept of Africans in America as a colonized nation, which was developed by Pan-African theorists in the United States of America, yeah, just to name one, Omowale Malcolm X, then it would make complete sense to you. And it was Omowale Malcolm X who taught that you can't understand what's happening in Harlem and unless you understand what's happening in Kinshasa, yeah, well, he never said Kinshasa, but in the Congo, yeah, and them kind of things, because we understand that there's a link between these two things. We live in a world, a global economy that is run again by a geopolitical entity known as the West, yeah. And so when we look at Pan-African development and the ideals of Pan-Africanism, one of the reasons why it's important is because it seeks to give us an understanding of the conditions of African people in various parts of the world, and that informs our practice, yeah, and our ideology in whatever part of the world that we are in at the moment. So stay tuned, family. I'm about to get thrown off. Gonna make 1 point, and then we're gonna done, yeah. And yeah, so I'm just gonna play until I get thrown off, and I'm gonna address the points that are relevant to the why I was thrown off, and then we're gonna done. All right, bless up. So seeking to develop an understanding of the world from a Pan-African perspective, just based upon where I am, would be insufficient, because the people that colonize us are not regional in the sense of they only understand where they are at any moment in time. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Yeah.
Shakara, did you answer the question? Did you, Shakara?
Sorry, I've already dealt with your question, and I'm trying to now make the statement. And I'm trying to make the statement that I was trying to make when you interrupted me. I'm trying to.
I'm gonna mute your mic. I'm gonna mute you. Don't make me mute you, bro. Yo, listen. I asked you, what does African politics have to do with gentrification happening to black people in America and the wealth gap? What did what you say have to do with that?
I am actually explaining that. I began.
No, it's not. How? You didn't.
I began by saying, if you understand, you understand the concept of Africans in America as an internal colony, yes, in America, colonized by white America, then you would understand the answer to that. But the reality is that we're dealing with a global economy. So what affects Africans on the continent, yeah, or there's a relationship between the conditions of Africans in the Americas, not necessarily.
How does the politics, give me an example right now today, how the wealth gap has anything to do with Black politics, African politics, and gentrification that's happening in our cities right now? Give me that correlation.
I noticed, sorry, that you interrupted me when I was trying to make a statement before, and now
you're not answering the question.
Sorry, no, but no, sorry, I was making a statement. You interrupted me to speak to Sekou.
Bro, I let you talk, and you're not answering the question. No, you haven't. No,
but now you're trying to confine my remarks to a specific question that you're asking.
Bro, I asked you a specific question. That means you give a specific answer.
I'm sorry, I don't know where this level of arrogance comes from. You interrupted me making an independent point.
Man.
Right?
Man.
You interrupted me making an independent point.
I'm about to mute you. We're gonna move on to the next person, bro. Next person.
No, I'm sorry. I would like to finish what I'm saying.
Yo, bro, you not. Yo, listen.
Sorry.
You make it. Yo, bro,
my
comments.
I was making an independent statement.
Bro, man. Yo,
I was making an independent statement.
You gotta chill. We're not gonna be able to do this. I'm not gonna let you talk no more, bro. We're not doing this, bro.
Why not?
Hold on a second. Hey, Rob, stop. Shaka, stop for a second. Stop for 1 second. Right? Hold on 1 second. I want to hear my brother Rob McCarthy. He's been waiting for a while in the waiting room. Let me just see him for quick. He's going to
Garfield, mega runway, yeah, because I'm
hold on, Shaka.
No, but God, because it's late, King. It's late, right? It's after 3 o'clock in the morning over here, so.
Oh, shoot, I forgot you on a different time. So you know what? Hold on a second. Hold on, Rob McCarthy. Shaka Rob, finish your point. Go ahead.
No, it's very simple. The point I was simply trying to make, yeah, and it does relate to Rob Ward's point, even though he may not want to accept it or may not understand it, yeah. But we're dealing with a global economy, right? So when we talk about institutions like the IMF and the World Bank and the World Economic Forum, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, and so on and so forth, we understand that the United States of America, which is responsible for the oppression and the economic and social mobility of African people on the continent, is also responsible for the global economic system that controls over Africans on the continent and in places like Jamaica and Haiti and Brazil and etc., have access to the resources that are produced in those nations. Yeah, so we see just in the same way that that the American government destroyed African neighborhoods in the United States of America, it also destroyed African economies in places like Jamaica, in places like Congo, in places like Ghana, and so on and so forth. There is a relationship.
Yo, Garfield, could you be real?
One second, please. One second, please.
Don't got that. What you talking about is not dealing with. You have not told us today how African politics in Africa has anything to do with gentrification.
We're there.
Has nothing to do with the fourth decade prison pipeline. None of it.
Allow me to finish.
Nothing that's going on over here with their politics that you want
allow
us to
me
be
to finish, please.
You have not done it. You just talking
allow me to finish, please. Thank you very much. Yeah. In as much as you spoke and I let you speak, allow me to speak. It's very simple.
You're just talking nothing. You're not answering the question.
And whatever the case, I allowed you to speak, and I'm going to demand the same respect. It's that simple.
Nah, man. Yeah? No. Next.
So
I'm in Rob McCarthy.
As has been said.
I'm in Rob McCarthy.
As has been said.
I'm in Rob McCarthy. You
Let him finish, Rob. Let him finish.
Garfield, since when do we do this and have conversations and we ask a direct question that has a direct answer and let a nigga tell us about colonialism shit that happened in the past? Come on, Garfield, man.
Garfield,
when we start doing this shit, bro?
With all due respect, yeah, I was actually speaking. Rabon interrupted me, yes, asked me a question, and then demanded that my remarks for the duration of my statement address his question.
You never answered the question. You never answered it. You never gave us an example of African politics.
I never claimed to be answering your question in its entirety. I was making a point.
Come on, man.
I was making a point. I was making.
Can we get to the next person?
I was making a
no more, man.
I was. It's very simple.
Yo, this is D block over here. Yo,
I was
this is D block over here. You got to get off the block, man. Go lock in, son.
Go ahead, Rob McCarthy. Go ahead.
Peace, fam. I was just going to.
All right, so that's the point at which I was thrown off here. Now, I said before, I'm not entirely sure who threw me off the panel. All I know is that Garfield and Rabon had the keys to the city, so to speak. To be able to do that. It does seem like it was Rabon, but as you can see, Garfield moved on with the conversation just like that. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. So evidently, me being thrown off the panel in such a manner, was not a problem for the owner of the platform at that time. However, let's actually address. We're done with the conversation now. Yeah, I'm not going to go do any more with the conversation, but I want to address Rabon's conversation, a question about gentrification and mass incarceration. Yeah, which is what he referred to a minute ago. Okay, so we're going to do that now, and this thing I might even make a video, a separate section of a video in and of itself. Yeah, but let's I'm gonna share the whole window for this one. All right, so we can go seamlessly through these things. Okay, all right. So gentrification, yeah, is right the process whereby the character of a poor urban area is changed by wealthier people moving in, improving housing, and attracting new businesses, often displacing current inhabitants in the process. Okay, so key issue here is changed by what? Wealthier people moving in. Okay, so the question then becomes, what is it, or through what means have the wealthier people in the American establishment acquired their wealth? Yeah, that's the first question. Why are these people wealthier? And is their wealth just simply based upon their development and exploitation of resources and dynamics within the United States of America? Okay, well, let's begin here. Yeah, make sure that all right, so I'll make sure my screen is sharing good with the American Congo Company. All right, I'm just going to run through a few different things here just to show the linkages here. The American Congo Company is was a US-owned concessionary company that was active in the Congo Free State. Yeah, this is Congo under colonialism when it was ruled by King Leopold II, and its successor, the Belgian Congo. Okay, which that's when they took the Congo Free State from Leopold, and then it became colonized by Belgium. All right. At first, it was focused on rubber extraction, but soon shifted to diamond mining. Okay. This rubber extraction, they were in rubber extraction also in Liberia. And one of the major companies that benefited from this was the companies, well, Firestone in particular, and also Ford, the car company. Okay. That's just bearing that in mind. And these were two of the biggest companies that revolutionized, the automobile industry in America, that had a severe impact upon the development of the American economy and industrialization, etc., 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 etc. Okay, so this is one of the means by which the wealthy in America became wealthy. Okay, formation. The American Congo Company was founded by Thomas Fortune Ryan and Daniel Goodenheim. All right, note them name there, Other participants included Edwin B. Aldrich and J.P. Morgan. Okay, note that. We're going to come back to that. And John D. Rockefeller. The company was incorporated in Albany, New York on the 22nd of October, 1906, and was originally capitalized at $510,000, a sum that was soon increased to $25 million. Also in 1906, King Leopold II arranged the creation of the Société Internationale Forestière et Minière du Congo, or Fourminiere. All right. So bearing in mind, yeah, that this is a collaboration, a pan-European alliance between white people in America and white people from Belgium in Africa. Americans took 25% of to 50% of Fourminiere's shares, with Leopold, the Congo Free State, and the Belgian investors holding the rest. One of the purposes of the American Congo Company was to explore and exploit Fourminiere's mineral resources. All right. In November 1906, the American Congo Company granted a 99-year license to gather rubber and other vegetable products and blah, blah. I'm not going to go into that. We're going to go into some history here. Right. Okay. Soon after the American Congo Company was formed, it was subject to an expose by the New York American, which claimed that the owners had influenced Secretary of State Elihu Root to keep the United States government from meddling in the Congo Free State. The result of the expose was that the American government now had good reason to look into Leopold II of Belgium, to what Leopold II of Belgium was doing in the Congo Free State. The Treaty of 1928, the 28th of November 1908, ceding the Congo Free State to Belgium, included a clause in which Belgium respected the concessions granted the American Congo Company and Fourminiere, two companies in which the Congo Free State had large holdings. The American Congo Company became a subsidiary of Fourminiere. Through these two companies, Americans owned up to half of the Belgian Congo's diamond productions. Okay, so significant amount of wealth was being accumulated by Americans in this period through diamond and rubber mining. All right, so what is Fourminiere? Yeah, the Society de International Forestier et Minier du Congo. I hope you're appreciating my, my parlez-vous. Known as Fourminiere, was a lumber and mining company in the Belgian Congo, founded by Jean Jadot in 1906. The company began diamond mining in Kasai. Yeah, so bear in mind, this is a French company collaborating with Americans, okay, and the Belgians. All right. At its height, Fourminiere was involved in gold and silver mining, cotton, palm and rubber farming, sawmilling, and even owned shops. The Belgian colonial state co-owned 50% of the company's capital, and the rest was being held by American shareholders. All right. So another one of the companies that was involved in diamond mining is De Beers. Yeah. All right. The De Beers Group is an international corporation that specializes in diamond mining, diamond sourcing, diamond retail, blah, blah, blah. All right. From its inception in 1888 until the start of the 21st century, De Beers controlled 80 to 80%, 85% of rough diamond distribution and was considered a monopoly. So they had a monopoly on the diamond mining vibration. Competition has since dismantled the complete monopoly. The De Beers Group now sells approximately 29.5% of the world's rough diamond production by a value through its global site holder and auction sales. Yeah. Now, the company was founded in 1888 by British businessman Cecil Rhodes. All right, listen carefully. Who was financed by the South African diamond magnate Alfred Bates and the London-based N.M. Rothschild and Sons Bank. In 1926, Ernest Oppenheimer, a German immigrant to Britain and later South Africa, who had earlier founded the mining company Anglo-American. Yeah, Anglo what? American, with the American financier J.P. Morgan, was elected to the board of De Beers. Okay, we're gonna leave that there. Just note the names, yeah. let's see what the Anglo-American company. So we've got America, we've got France, we've got Belgium, we've got Britain. Okay, Anglo-American PLC. Anglo-American PLC is a British listed multinational mining company with headquarters in London. It is the world's largest producer of platinum, with around 40% of the world output, as well as being a major producer of diamonds, copper, nickel, iron ore, etc., etc. The company has operations in Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, North America, and South America. Anglo-American has a private listing on the stock exchange, and it's blah blah blah. I'm not gonna deal with that. So this is also based in London, England. Right. Let's go. Sir Ernest Oppenheimer, a Jewish German emigre, founded the Anglo-American Corporation in 1917 in Johannesburg, South Africa, with the financial backing of the American bank J.P. Morgan, and 1 million raised from UK sources that to start the gold mining company. This fact is reflected in the company's name. The Anglo-American became the major stakeholder in the Beers Company in 1926, and a company formerly controlled by Alfred Bates, also a Jewish German emigre. Okay, so the name that we've seen running through all of that, yeah, is the name J.P. Morgan. So what is J.P. Morgan? J.P. Morgan & Co. is a commercial investment banking institution founded by J.P. Morgan in 1871 through a series of mergers and acquisitions. The company is now a subsidiary of J.P. Morgan Chase, one of the largest banking institutions in the world. The company is sometimes referred to as the Morgan House, so the House of Morgan, or simply Morgan. Okay, so bear that in mind, that we've seen an accumulation of wealth across the European diaspora, including the United States of America, that makes these white Americans very wealthy. Okay, so one example, or a myriad of examples, connected examples that relate to what makes these Europeans wealthy enough to be able to enact policies of gentrification also. But how does this relate to the issue of the mass incarceration of African peoples in the United States of America? Well, we're going to consult this article that was published by the Financial Times last year. And as you can see, it's entitled J.P. Morgan Funds Invested in Core Civic Debt After Vow to Stop Financing Private Prisons. Okay. Scrutiny of the U.S. criminal justice system has focused its attention on financial backers. All right. Let's see. 2 years after J.P. Morgan Chase announced it would no longer finance the private prison industry in the United States, the bank's assets management arm has disclosed a position in a private prison bond sold last month. Funds tied to the bank have invested $25 million or more in a bond issued by Core Civic, which runs private prisons and detention centers across the USA. Apparently, Core Civic is the largest private imprisonment institution, the largest or the second largest private prison detention institution in the United States of America, and it also runs immigration detention centers. The funds each bought a piece of a recent 450 million bond sold by the company in April. JP Morgan Investment Funds, 9 billion global high yield bond fund, took the largest position among the funds and holds 12.5 in the Core Civic bond, according to regulatory filings for the end of April compiled by Bloomberg. The asset management arm's 7 billion high yield fund also owes 9.5 million of the debt, according to a disclosure from JP Morgan Asset Management. Campaigners for reform of the US criminal justice system, which disproportionately incarcerates people of color, increasingly put the focus on the industry's financial backers, with the result that a host of banks have agreed to cut ties with the operators of private facilities in recent years. In March 2019, bowing to pressure from activists, JP Morgan said it would no longer provide banking services to private prisons. And the article is about the fact that actually they are continuing to do so despite making that declaration in 2019. So to cut a long story short, a bank that enriched itself by exploiting the land and the resources and the labor of African people on the continent of Africa, and I might add, in the Caribbean and throughout the Americas, also is one of the primary funders of the private prison industry that disproportionately incarcerates African people in the United States of America. Do I need to substantiate this any further for you? Tell me, please, have I established a relationship here between politics and economics on the African continent and gentrification and mass incarceration of Africans in the United States of America? Have I achieved that this evening? Let me know, kings and queens. I actually want to know the answer to this question. Please, let me know. Africa Reimagined said, damn, you unwrapped it well. Anybody else? There's 25 people watching. I want to know, have I just established a link between mass incarceration and gentrification of African communities in the United States of America and politics of the African continent? Have I done that just now? Everything is everything. Say, yeah, man. Me want to know. And while I'm getting those answers in, I'm going to recommend something to you. Melanated God says you're good, you answered it. I want to recommend something to you, kings and queens. A very good message, yeah, by Baba Jacob Carruthers. Yeah, YouTube this today or tomorrow. A speech by Baba Jacob Carruthers called Black Talk and the White Question. Black Talk and the White Question, where he details a lot of the dynamics that were present in this conversation in terms of the evolution of ideological ideas and strategies throughout the sojourn of resistance movements to enslavement, colonization, and neocolonization. Yeah. And the present manifestations as regards to what at that time it was the 1990s when he was speaking. All right. Live on in prosperity to Baba Jacob Carruthers. I doubt, yeah, Jacob Carruthers, who is the author of this great and illuminating book, yeah, Intellectual Warfare. All right. Okay. You're not gonna hear them book here come up in a lot of these conversations. You're not gonna hear about them book here. A man like who Jacob Carruthers, Baba Jedi Shemshu Jehuti, as he's more properly referred to. Anybody else? Conan Lee, greetings, says yes, you have established a connection, and also in the debate to even Ramon and Garfield did not understand. Brother Rabo clearly wasn't listening. Anybody else who heard me run down the thing? Did I establish a relationship? I want to know. All right, I'm done, kings and queens. Finish. Yeah, it's been 3 hours. If there are any questions, I'll answer them, but I'm gonna wrap up. Africa Reimagined, what you have done is expose the robbers. This is the importance of history. Without it, we can't understand the robbers. And I've seen that means the demons masquerading as angels. I agree. Absolutely agree. So the idea is that from a Pan-African perspective, what we do is that we identify how our oppressors are relating to us where we are, and also how they are relating to our brothers and sisters wherever our brothers and sisters are, in order to develop a comprehensive understanding of the nature of the system of oppression. Know your enemy. And all of that was established just mostly, by following the Wikipedia trail. What just happened there doesn't require any in-depth research. You know, if I have no PhD to engage in that. Yeah? Simple Wikipedia trail run. And we establish the link to Rotted. I want them to them. All right? So, yeah. Madonna, Kings and Queens. All right. What I'm gonna do, because this is gonna be the last installment, yeah. And I'm done. So I am going to Noah, my brother Quadro, good to see you. And yep, good book to read, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Yeah, I've already mentioned White Malice, which is a new book, very thick, but yep, Confessions of an Economic Hitman is another one. Anybody want to come live? I'm going to stay on for another 15 minutes and I'm done. Yeah, so anybody want to come live? You know what I'm saying? I'm done. 15 minutes, yeah. And by the way, I'm going to repeat. I want to know about this. I want sources, yeah, and evidence of the scam that Baba Marcus Mosiah Garvey was involved in. Meta the Black says, not exactly too off topic, but are there any particular sites you use in attaining easily accessible Pan-African reading material? Works by Kwesi Pra, which are quite hard to find. Yeah, no. Kwesi Pra's work is not as easy to find as some of us. But the website, I'll tell you what, I have an interview with Baba Kwesi Pra where he mentions the website, and it's slipping my mind at the moment. Check out my interview with Baba Kwesi Pra on this channel and check what he says in terms of how to access his work. I do ask him that question. Yeah. But there's not a general website, and this is why the things that we've got to solve in this day and age, in terms of updating technology and even getting audiobooks, for our classical text, within Pan-African and African centered circles. Having said that, Race First by Baba Tony Martin, which is on the Garvey movement, is now an audiobook, was released earlier this year. And it's pretty good listening, so do check that out. And yep, White Malice is on an audiobook as well. It's written by a European, but the information is still very important. Africa Reimagined says, Shakara, Nkrumah's neocolonialism needs updating. Is this a project you are willing to work on? There's a brother in the UK who would like us to work on it. Nkrumah establishes these connections, also these multinationals. Yeah, I'm down for that. At the same time, let me also introduce you. Thanks for that, because it does allow me to share this, which is a document developed by a coalition of organizations called the African Unity Movement for Decolonization. Make sure it's showing, the African Unity Movement for Decolonization. You could get this on the website for We Charge Colonialism, WeChargeColonialism.org. Yeah, let me make sure that's the right email address. Oh, sorry. Yeah, rechargecolonialism.org. Yeah, you can get this paper, and it's the We Charge Colonialism of people of African descent. Yeah, compiled by the African Unity Movement for Decolonization. And as you can see, it outlines colonialism and neocolonialism, and goes through how it manifests itself in Azania, South Africa, the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Ghana, Guinea-Bissau, Namibia, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe, Haiti, United States, Venezuela, United Kingdom. Okay, it also gives some background in terms of what is colonization, internal colonialism, and neo-colonialism. It goes through human rights abuses, acts of genocide, etc., etc. And so this is a beautiful collaborative effort done by some Africans not too long ago. Actually, this document was published less than a year ago. I believe it was December in 2021. It was released. Yeah, and you would have heard me in my answer to Rabon detail this concept of internal colonialism. Yeah, the people that were key in terms of developing that concept were Baba Kwame Ture and Baba Charles Hamilton. And so yeah, you know what I mean. It's necessary for us to note that. All right. So I wasn't making that up, but again, you have to be involved in some Pan-African organizing and some political education to be engaged in these concepts. Yeah. And just to delve into the point even more. Yeah. Let me just read something for you in relation to how the UK factors into this whole dynamic of neocolonialism. Yeah, let's. And by the way, kings and queens, you know, we're as Africans in the UK at the moment, you know, so we're all in deep mourning at the moment. So please do send us your love and your energies, you know, because we are mourning, you know, with the nation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain as it stands right now. But yeah, just to say, I do all of the work of our ancestors needs updating in it. I do think though that the brilliance of neocolonialism is that so much of it still applies, yeah, to today in terms of understanding the neocolonial dynamic. You know, it is the book that I would suggest people read first. But yeah, so I don't know of an audio book for that one. Do you know what I'm saying? So that needs to be done. That's the kind of updating that we need as well. Yeah. Right. It says Britain's colonial ascent. Hold on a second. Okay. Let's get to right up to date. Yeah. In 2021, imperialism still pervades on the African continent. The case of Vedenta Resources, majority owner of Konkola copper mines, Zambia's largest copper producing mine, exemplifies the point. In the 90s, it took advantage of Zambia's economic crisis to purchase Zambia's consolidated copper mines. The development agreement, quote unquote, that secured the deal committed them through the KCM, the Konkola copper mines, to paying mineral royalties of just 0.6% in an industry where 5 to 10% had been the average. In 2006 to 2007, they paid the Zambian government just 6.1 million on over 1 billion in extracted copper ore. The agreement had also written in it a 20-year stability period to safeguard against future policy reforms. The act of these decisions are a perpetual state of underdevelopment, crippling Africa's ability to fund public service provisions and develop their copper economies. Compounding that is the environmental damage. KCM have also been implicated in serious incidents of environmental mismanagement and compromising the health of locals. The most serious being when sulfur dioxide emissions from its smelters were being released into drinking water and silting local rivers. accusations of labor rights abuses and draconian employment practices persist too. Laborers are said to be paid as little as £37 a month, £114 below the country's average living expenses of £150 a month. It is a mistake to believe Britain's colonial tendencies are a thing of the past. In 2013, during the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition, the government created the High-Level Propensity Partnership Initiative, an initiative to enable British companies to access the continent's raw materials in exchange for British aid. Yeah. The initiative pledged to support British oil and mining companies in finding new markets in Africa to exploit. In the policy report, it promised the prosperity through increasing exports and investment, opening markets, gatekeeping access to resources, primarily to UK businesses. Yeah, and so on and so forth. There is another document called the Neocolonialism, published by the War on Want a few years ago, entitled Britain's Scramble for Africa's Energy and Mineral Resources. And it details the fact that 100 or so companies, on the London Stock Exchange extract something to the tune of $192 billion worth of African mineral wealth. Yeah, adata go on right here now. Adata go on right here no. Mr. Untouchable, I was joking, my brother. Like, yeah, you know, yeah. Elizabeth dead. I was being facetious. You know what I mean? So check that out, kings and queens. The document, once again, is published by the African Unity Movement for Decolonization. Very informative. We charge colonialism, and it's a bite-sized overview of how neocolonialism or colonialism manifests in today's world. Yeah, the document is just over. It's under 100 pages. Yeah, so in total, it's 91 pages. And yeah, you get a good overview of Wagwan. All right, kings and queens, me done. This is the last in the series. All right, I hope I've addressed the points. And the point is that the conscious community is becoming hostile to those who affirm the Pan-African, African-centered ethos. For the sake of affirming some assimilationist, neocolonial institutions. And I want to be clear about that. I came on the conversation really to support Brother Sekou. Yeah, I believe he's doing a good work in terms of infusing more Pan-African, political, economic, and cultural conversation into the platforms that he is becoming popular on. In particular, Sarnetta. And I believe that the brother should be supported in that regard. I'm going to answer this question. Will you be on the channel again? I don't know. You know, like me say, every time I don't really engage in a lot of online chats. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. So I'm not popular in the online chattiverse anyway. You know, for the most part, I don't regularly do them. But when you go on a platform and you get dashed off twice, you know what I mean? You know, in a row as well. You know, you have to heed the message that's being sent to you. So I don't know. You know, I don't like Garfield is a man who I met when he came over here recently. And you know, we share cordial vibes. He gifted me a copy of his book. you know what I'm saying, which I'm grateful for. But yeah, obviously the things I'm saying are problematic at the minute, and I don't know what that means, so we'll see in it. You know what I'm saying? I don't have any hate for the brother. You know what I mean? Any of the brothers, really. It's just, it is what it is. You know, and that it's not the only platform that I've been thrown off, but that's another story for another time. Yeah. Yes, kings and queens. I hate that. All right. I'm gonna send you off with a snippet of Baba Jedi Shemsu Jehuti in the message, yeah, that I'm encouraging you all to check out. And this is one of our ancestors who is relatively unsung. No, I shouldn't say relatively unsung, but not as known of as he should be, yeah, for the works that he has done. And so I'm encouraging you all to check him out and check out this particular presentation. Baba Jacob Carava's Black Talk and the White Question. Tendai Mwari, giving thanks to the mother, father, creator. Big up Sosa, by the way. Big up Sosa. I mean, big up yourself, sis. Don't know. Tendai Mwari, giving thanks unto the mother, father, creative life force of the universe. Kozai Muzimu Mokolo, giving praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tomi, Abibi Fahodiye. African liberation and African power for all African people. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.
Talk about black talk and the white question. This focuses on the intergenerational dialogue among Africans in the United States about the condition of protracted oppression, or as we say in Chicago, the mess that we have been in and are still in, that mess. I want to talk about how we have talked about that mess. Look at it from a kind of historical perspective. And that's very important today because we have coming on the scene now a new crop of Afro-American, as they call themselves, and continental African intellectuals who are now challenging our victorious march toward the restoration of African civilization as the necessary foundation for our African future. And we need to address this rising tide of anti-Africanism among so-called Afro-Americans because they are some people who have a lot of resources at their disposal. They have the whole European intellectual establishment behind them. They have a lot of cash behind them. They have access to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all of the publishing houses and all of the TV stations. And so we have to deal with them as they try to communicate to people. They are also trying to fabricate an intellectual history that never existed and are trying to initiate an African future that can never come into existence, and hopefully, God forbid, that it should come into existence. They are hailed by their European patrons and mentors as preeminent in fields of African and African American philosophy and literature. So let us deal with a context under which we can deal with them. The intergenerational dialogue or debate or argument started a long time ago. And it started, I guess, with the first African reaction to the beginning of the system of oppression, and it has continued down to the present day. And what I would like to do is call that dialogue, that intergenerational dialogue, that is at least 2 centuries old, but more than likely much older. I would like to call that just simply Black talk. I first heard it, ran into it when I was a boy, sitting in the barber shop. Back in those days down south, when you went to the barber shop, if you were a boy, you had to wait until all the men got their haircuts, even those that came in after you. So every time another man came in, that meant you went further down the line before you get a haircut. So sometimes I stayed in there all day. And I would listen to the old men as they came in, and they would talk that talk. Now, let me say a few words about these new Afro-American intellectuals, a group of people that Sheikh Anta Diop called the young African philosophers, as he gave them a lecture. And when we turn to them, we have to, again, emphasize the fact that we are dealing here with the white question. We're dealing with the white question because, in the first place, they are who they are and where they are to a large extent because of their education. The people that I'm talking about have been educated, both those from the continent of Africa and those from the diaspora here in the United States, have been educated in what the European culture calls the best universities in the world. They have been educated in the best universities of France and Britain and Germany and the United States, Harvard and places like that, and Oxford and Cambridge and the Sorbonne and the more exclusive universities in France. They've been well educated according to the prevailing standards. In addition to that, their mentors, the people who nurtured them, the people who became their models and who introduced them to what they feel are the more profound vistas of intellectual insight, have practically all been the advance guard of European intellectuals. I'm talking about people like Foucault, the great French intellectual, who introduced this whole new way of thinking that may be called postmodernism. One of the things that these Black disciples of that school point out is that, unfortunately, the Black nationalists are trying to become modern just when the Europeans have begun to become postmoderns. What in the world does that mean? Think about it. Post-modernity. Deconstructionism. People like Grimsky and Altrusa, neo-Marxist thinkers who have been their mentors, whose ideas they take as the framework for analyzing the condition that we are in, for critiquing this world that we're in, who have them to just totally ignore the fact that Martin Delany was critiquing Western culture long before these people were born. When Karl Marx was a baby, Martin Delany was looking at the world. Africans saw deep into the nature of European societies and European thought a long time before these so-called geniuses came on the scene, but those are their mentors. And when you read their work carefully, you can understand why they think like they think, because they have been well trained. Their American forerunners, their African American forerunners are people like E. Franklin Frazier. They have a 1619 concept of the history of African Americans. Although every now and then they will mention Africa, they still have they still have a 1619 concept that we are, and many of them put it this way. They said, oh yes, we admit we are African Americans, Afro-Americans, but it's more American than it is African, you know? The question is, what culture do we have? Shall we accept the culture of our oppressors? The question is not that we have been raped. We go along with that, yeah, we got raped. The question is, though, what do you do after the rape? That is, do you fall in love with the rapist and marry him and teach the children to love him and adore him and honor him? Do you succumb to the rapist after he's raped you? Think about it. Think about it. Well, they're American forerunners. They're African American forerunners. Frazier, Richard Wright,